Most of us have a daily routine, something that we do all the time, that we don't even think twice about. Innocent things, carrying out our errands, maybe driving to and from work. Mundane activities. But that's probably one of the scariest times in our day, when we're not aware of our surroundings because we've done something so many times it's become a habit. We don't expect the unexpected, but that's exactly what happened in this case. A young woman's life was stolen when she least expected it, and it was caught on video. Sofia Martinez was born on September 28, 1981, to her mother, Lourdes, and her father, Juan Martinez. By the time she was born, Sofia already had an older sister, Dulce, who was 6 years older. And just 3 years later, Juan and Lourdes welcomed another daughter, Marianne Martinez, to the family. They were living in El Paso, Texas, which is a border town. It's called a border town because it shares a border with Mexico. As a matter of fact, Lourdes came to America when she was younger to seek a better life for herself and her future family. She worked hard to create a stable and loving environment for everyone she loved. Sofia grew up having a very strong bond with her mother and her sisters. Her older sister Dulce was someone she looked up to, a steady role model who inspired her in so many ways. Meanwhile, Sofia was also a big sister to her little sister, Marianne, and they too had a special bond as well. Marianne would often look to Sofia for guidance, like little sisters normally do. And since Sofia and Marianne were close in age, they grew up doing everything together. Sofia attended Bonham Elementary and MacArthur Intermediate School. As a child, she always loved to learn, and this would eventually lead her to wanting to become a teacher. Over time, Sofia's parents' relationship unfortunately became rocky, and they went their separate ways, with Lourdes meeting Eladio Lario and eventually getting married. They had 2 more children, 2 little boys only a year apart from one another, Felipe in April of 1995 and Elias in April of 1996. These boys meant everything to Sofia. She was 14 and attending high school when her first little brother was born. By this time, her older sister had gotten married and had children of her own as well, whom Sofia also adored. Dulce actually ended up living right next door to their family home, where her mother, her stepdad, Sofia, Marianne, and her 2 little brothers lived. It was so much fun being so close together, because sometimes we fear that when our siblings grow up and have families of their own, they'll be far away, and we won't stay in touch with them. But for this family, being close was very important. Sofia loved coming home to a house bustling with energy and filled with loved ones. As soon as she would open the door, she'd call out, "Where are my babies?" And her brothers and niece and nephews would run towards her and jump into her arms. She listened as they shared their stories with her about school, their little adventures being children, and their latest accomplishments. These moments made her feel deeply connected to her family, and being with the children brought Sofia immense happiness. These were the times she absolutely cherished the most. She would get on the floor with them, play games, go on walks, or would simply just talk or listen. The lively, love-filled home provided Sofia with a sense of security and comfort. Knowing that she had a strong support system that cared so deeply for her made her feel truly lucky. Sofia's bond with her baby brothers, Felipe and Elias, was the highlight of her life. She treated them like her own sons. Sofia would tuck them into bed every night. She would make sure that they knew they were loved, safe, and secure. Something else she loved to do was be in the kitchen, especially when her mom was cooking. Sofia's excitement to sneak a taste of her mother's cooking before it was ready was a constant source of playful frustration for Liz. While her mother would remind her to be patient and wait for the main meal, Sofia's mischievous side would often get the better of her, and she even claimed with a smile on her face that the food tasted better when she tried it early. Lourdes secretly cherished these moments. Their banter would turn into laughter, and they shared a bond beyond just being a mother and daughter. Lourdes was Sofia's confidant. She trusted her mother with anything, her hopes, her dreams, her fears, her worries, and she knew that her mother would always listen with love and with patience. By the year 2000, Sofia was a senior at Burgess High School, which was a 3-minute walk from their home. Sofia was known for her hard work and her humility. She never sought the spotlight for achievements. She preferred to recognize others' contributions, and this modesty only added to the admiration that her classmates had for her, as well as her teachers. What made Sophia stand out was her kind and open-hearted nature. She genuinely cared about her classmates. She was always willing to help or lend an ear for someone in need. She was a trusted friend to those needing someone to talk to, and people found themselves drawn to her for that reason. Outside of school, Sophia worked a part-time job at a retail store, J.C. Penney, in the local mall. This job gave her the freedom to buy everything she loved, which meant clothing, jewelry, and makeup, allowing her to express her individual style. It sounds like a typical teenager, but Sophia had her eye on something special for a while, something big for her 18th birthday. She saved up enough money to buy a brand new, comfy but sporty bright red Pontiac Grand Am car, and it even had a sunroof. This car was a reflection of Sophia's hard work and her independence. Sophia could not resist the temptation to show off her brand new car. She loved driving it to school and all over town with the sunroof down, just feeling the wind blowing through her hair. The car was meticulously maintained. No food or drink was allowed inside. She wanted to preserve its pristine condition, and that was her rule. As March rolled around, Sophia was only a few months away from her high school graduation. She could hardly wait for the big milestones ahead, especially prom. She had her graduation pictures already taken, wearing her purple cap and gown. Every step felt like it was leading her closer to the start of a whole new adventure. She had her sights set on attending the University of Texas in El Paso, hoping to study education, and then she planned to return to her hometown to become a history teacher, helping shape the young minds of tomorrow and giving back to the community that she loved so much. For her, teaching wasn't just a job. It was her calling, a way she could truly make a difference. Driven and ambitious, Sophia was ready to step out on her own, from a teenager into adulthood. She had aspirations of finding her happily ever after and experiencing the joy of falling in love. Sophia's cheeky catchphrase that she would say all the time was, "Treat me like the princess I am," and she even spoiled herself. She had high expectations and had already saved enough money to pay her college tuition by her senior year. She was a vocational occupational student in high school, which meant she only had to go to classes for half the day, giving her plenty of time to work after school. She also participated in the Future Teachers of America, and although Sophia was very busy all the time, she truly enjoyed just lounging around the house or even sleeping in when she had the opportunity. When she wasn't working or relaxing, Sophia enjoyed going out on dates. Even though she never really had a steady boyfriend, she still liked hanging out with friends and going out in El Paso on the weekends. Sophia was extra excited about a blind date that she had been set up on. Her coworker from her retail job, let's call him James to avoid confusion, worked together with her, but he also worked as a hairstylist on the side. He wanted to set Sophia up with one of his clients, thinking they would hit it off really well. James told Sophia that this guy was one of the nicest people he knew and would be perfect for her. Oh, James suggested all three of them meet up at a Popular One special and to fall in love. This date was a big deal to her. She thought that this guy could be the one for her, so she wanted to make sure she planned ahead and looked her very best that evening. She, her mother, and her younger teenage sister, Marianne, who was 16 at this point, were sharing in her excitement. Sophia usually listened to her favorite radio station, Power 102, when she got ready to go to school or for a night out. That Friday, Marianne and her mom were there as she excitedly tried on a number of different outfits. Sounds familiar, right? I think we've all done this before. The outfits looked beautiful on her. She was a gorgeous young woman. She had shiny, chocolate brown hair that just grazed her shoulders, big brown eyes, flawless skin, and of course, a beautiful smile that she would accentuate with bright red lipstick, which is one of my favorites too, especially against dark hair. With every outfit she showcased to her mom and sister, she would ask, "Do you like this?" And then they would rate it. She went through a bunch of them until she put on this really pretty bright red dress. She looked absolutely stunning. It was one of her favorites. She paired it with sheer stockings, a cute purse, and heels. They were like, that is the one. Around 10:15, Sophia said goodnight to her 3- and 4-year-old baby brothers and kissed her mother and sister goodbye as she ran out the front door, saying, "Okay, I'm leaving now. Bye." Marianne and Lourdes actually watched out of the window as the red Pontiac left the driveway, and they continued watching until they could no longer see the lights of the car as Sophia drove away. But that would be the last time they ever saw her. They had no way of knowing that such a happy and innocent night out would end in Sophia's murder. Lourdes wasn't worried about Sophia at all. She was a responsible teenager, and like I mentioned, she always came home by the time the clubs were closing. Lourdes knew Sophia was meeting with a coworker she was familiar with, and Sophia had also told her mom and sister the name of the guy she was meeting for the first time that night on her blind date. So when her family went to bed that night, they expected to see Sophia the next morning. But when Marianne went into her sister's bedroom on Saturday, March 11th, just hours after Sophia had left, she was surprised to see Sophia wasn't there, and everything was the same way Sophia had left it the night before. Even her bed was still made, like she hadn't slept in it. Marianne shouted to her mother, asking if she knew where Sophia was, but Lourdes had no idea. Now, they both realized she must not have come home at all. Then they received a call around 10:30 or 11 a.m. from Sophia's supervisor at JCPenney, advising them that Sophia had not shown up for her shift at work. Since Sophia wasn't the type of teenager to skip her curfew and not show up at work without contacting her family or her job, they began to worry. They, of course, contacted her older sister and some friends, asking if they had heard from her, but they hadn't. Then they started calling around to local hospitals, thinking maybe she got into a car accident or something, but there was no record of that either. Sophia's mom finally decided to contact the El Paso Police Department that morning to report that her daughter was missing. She told them every detail she could remember. She even added that Sophia could be wearing shoes that were a size too small for her. Every detail mattered. She also told them what type of car Sophia drove, and gave a description of the red dress, Sophia's hairstyle, and all her physical characteristics, as well as the last time they'd seen her, the night before around 10:15 p.m. And of course, that she was on her way to a blind date with a man she had never met before. She also provided the officers with a picture of Sophia. She picked the most recent one from her graduation cap and gown photo shoot. Speaking of that graduation, it's so sad that she would never get to walk across that stage. What El Paso PD did not know was that at the same time, a little before noon on Saturday, March 11th, New Mexico state troopers were stumbling upon a troubling scene in a desolate area of the desert called Anthony Gap. It was close to where Texas meets the border with New Mexico. About 100 yards from the road was a brand new red Pontiac Grand Am. It was in perfect condition besides dust all over it and what appeared to be a broken passenger side window. It was shattered but still intact, so the glass hadn't completely fallen out. Something had made an impact with it, and it looked like it was possibly a small caliber bullet. Now that's alarming. By simply looking through the windows, the trooper could tell there appeared to be a blood-like substance inside the car in various areas. This wasn't good at all. The trooper had the car towed to the New Mexico State Crime Lab for thorough processing. But this was in a whole other state, so at this point the two agencies weren't communicating or making a connection between Sophia and her car. But we know this is her car, and this isn't looking good, knowing what we know. They ran the registration and found out the name and address of the owner. It's Lourdes. They reached out to notify her that the car had been found, and they asked if she was aware of why it would be out there, thinking this could have been a grand theft case. When Lourdes was notified, she explained that her 18-year-old daughter drove that car and that she was missing. When Sophia's family was notified that the car was found, they already knew something bad must have happened to her, because she would never just abandon that car. It was her prized possession. The New Mexico State Police made contact with El Paso PD, and they shared information because, at this point, all they could assume was that Sophia was not safe, and they didn't have much time to spare. But they didn't have any leads either. They were about to get a major, heartbreaking clue the very next morning. Sadly, on Sunday, March 12th, just about 48 hours since Sophia had set out on that date, a horrific discovery was made by a couple of teenagers who were out in the El Paso desert collecting cans on the outskirts of town, on Mom Street. They spotted the body of a young female lying face up in a red dress, about 300 yards from the road, not too far from a golf course called the Painted Dunes. This area was about 10 miles from where Sophia's red Pontiac had been located. A group of detectives working on Sophia's case, led by Lieutenant George McBain and detectives Antonio Tabuyo and Karen Kack, rushed to the area. It didn't take long for them to realize that this was Sophia. It had to be. Even though they didn't find a wallet, a purse, or her identification, she matched the description, and it was clear that this was also a murder. Her stockings were torn, her dress was covered in blood, and her face was matted with more blood and wet dirt. Upon closer inspection, the detectives noticed obvious bruising on the inside of her thighs and severe trauma to her face and head. There was a shoe impression near the body, and this was now officially a murder investigation. The public information officer, Al Valare, who was a veteran on the force, was called out. When he arrived, there were already a number of detectives as well as the media on the scene. He had been an officer since 1981 and had seen his fair share of homicides, but just by looking at this beautiful young woman lying all alone, deceased in the middle of nowhere, he knew that this case was different. There was something chilling about the way she was just left there, and he believed right away with all his experience that this wasn't going to be an easy case to solve. He just had this gut feeling this wasn't the normal, everyday domestic situation. As sad as those are, of course, we're not trying to minimize their impact, but something told him there was more to this. This was even more evil than a relationship gone wrong, and he would actually be right. What detectives had to do now was notify Sophia's family, which is no easy task. It was early that afternoon when two officers knocked on Lourdes's door. Both of Sophia's sisters were also there when their mother answered. The officers came in, sat down, and told them they had found Sophia. They asked if she was still alive, and they told her, no, she's not. They explained that her body had been found, and Marianne said it was like a bomb went off. She couldn't believe this was really happening. They wondered, could this really be her? And that's when the officers asked a very peculiar question that caught them off guard. They asked if Sophia had a child, and Marianne, of course, taken aback, said, Sophia? No, why? They presented the family with an item they said came from the scene where they found Sophia. It was a picture of a little boy, and they were stunned. It was one of Sophia's little brothers, a picture they knew she kept in her purse. So it was true. Sophia was gone, and they were sure of it now. Lourdes described it as a living nightmare. She said, you think that you're going to wake up and that this is all going to be a bad dream, but it's not. It's real. The officers informed the family that this picture, of who we now know as one of Sophia's little brothers, was found tucked inside Sophia's left bra cup. On the back of the image, it read, "My baby in his truck." Sophia had always carried a picture of her baby brothers in her pocket or her purse, but not in her bra. This discovery puzzled her family. They wondered what led Sophia to place the photo inside her bra. And I'm sure that you and I are both thinking of a few reasons or circumstances that would lead to this. But before I explain exactly why and what situation Sophia was forced into, let's go back to the evidence. Officer Lidio Alas from the El Paso Police Department and one of the crime scene technicians assigned to Sophia's murder case went out to the desert near Junction 404 and O'Hara Road in New Mexico on March 12th to investigate the site where Sophia's car had been found. By the time she arrived, the vehicle had already been towed, but she carefully documented and photographed the entire scene. She noted tire tracks leading in and out of the area and observed a sneaker print heading toward the highway. Afterward, the officer visited the New Mexico State Troopers' garage where the vehicle was being held. She took thorough interior and exterior photographs, capturing significant details for the investigation. The images revealed blood stains on various parts of the car, including the seats, the interior door panels, the steering wheel, the driver's seat belt, and the rearview mirror. She also documented that the passenger side window had been shattered, leaving broken glass throughout the vehicle. More investigators were called out to do a complete analysis of the car. From there, Officer Olivas headed to northeast El Paso, where Sophia's body had been located, so she could document that scene with photographs as well. There was a very limited amount of evidence in this location, but 1.22 caliber bullet was recovered from nearby where Sophia's body had been found. At the same time, Detective Karen Kack from El Paso PD started interviewing Sophia's friends and family members. A critical part of this entire investigation from this point was understanding Sophia's plans for that night when she was killed. Detectives focused on piecing together any details that could lead them to finding out who had taken her life and why. After speaking to her loved ones, they uncovered that Sophia had planned on going on a blind date. This information became a significant lead. Through further investigation, the detectives identified 21-year-old Ernie Hernandez as the man Sophia was supposed to meet. He said that their friend, whom we'll call James, had described Sophia as a beautiful, fun, and kind young woman, which made him very excited to meet her. Ernie shared that they had agreed to meet at the old plantation in El Paso around 11 p.m., but he said that due to his nerves, he was about 15 minutes late. When he got there, only his hairstylist James was there, so they waited together for Sophia to arrive. But according to Ernie, she never showed up, which led him to believe that he had been stood up. He explained he had no idea what happened to Sophia. He had never even seen her before. He was supposed to meet her that night. Meanwhile, on March 13th, Sophia's autopsy was being conducted. Sadly, this poor young girl had died from brain injuries due to multiple gunshot wounds to the face and head. She had been shot 5 times. One wound was to the right side of the back of her head, one through the center of her right eye, one through her right cheek next to her nose, and one to her left cheek. Sophia also received a grazing wound through her left eyebrow area. The medical examiner recovered only 4 bullets from inside Sophia's body, but we know that one was left behind where she was found, possibly the one that grazed her brow. They also tested her to see if she had been sexually violated. Swabs of DNA preliminarily tested positive for semen, which indicated that she had intercourse close to the time of her death. A toxicology report was negative for drugs and alcohol. On March 17th, a memorial mass was held for Sophia at her high school, where 300 people gathered to mourn her loss. Sophia's sister, Marianne, gave a heartfelt speech, and an orchestra and guitar group played musical performances during the service. A graduation photo of Sophia was placed beside her casket. The headstone at her gravesite marking her final resting place was inscribed with her favorite phrase, "Treat me like the princess I am." It was a reminder of her vibrant spirit, and of course, her cute and sassy side. Sophia's mother, Lourdes, had to face the harsh reality that her daughter was gone, and her killer was still at large. All of Sophia's loved ones were desperate for answers. They were consumed by fear and anxiety, knowing that another family could potentially endure the same pain if something were not done quickly to catch her killer. But unfortunately, the detectives hadn't found anything to lead them in a particular direction, and that actually terrified her family. The fact that Sophia's car keys had never been found and that the key ring included the key to the family's home, along with her wallet being taken, containing her identification and their address, meant that the killer could easily know where they lived and come to harm them. And I have to say that is truly frightening. By this time, Sophia's blind date, Ernie, had been ruled out. His alibi was confirmed, and James was interviewed as well. He provided the same details as Ernie. But despite not being a suspect, the public's opinion of Ernie remained unchanged. When he would go out to the grocery store or just go anywhere in public, he would start to overhear people whispering about him, saying that it must have been the blind date. Everyone in their town was discussing the tragic events surrounding Sophia's murder, and this really hurt and frustrated him. I can imagine how hard that would be, especially if you were ruled out, but the court of public opinion still felt like you had something to do with it. We see this a lot now, especially with social media, but the detectives truly did rule him out. I did forget to mention that he was also cleared with the DNA sample. In an attempt to offer his condolences, Ernie reached out to Sophia's family, including her mom. Lourdes was so grateful to hear that her daughter would have made a friend if she had made it to the club to meet him that night. Ernie struggled with regret because he didn't pick Sophia up for their date that night. He admitted that he should have insisted on going to get her and even met her family instead of having her drive to the club alone. He said that he kept replaying this choice in his mind and that he would for the rest of his life. And I'm sure that is a really hard thing to think about, but this was not his fault. With Ernie Hernandez being cleared as a suspect in Sophia's murder, the detectives were back at square one. Crime scene technicians went back to Sophia's vehicle, hoping that it could provide even more clues. One very observant investigator, after all, that's their job, spotted something lying on the floor of the car. Upon closer examination, it was a receipt. They discovered that this receipt was dated the night that Sophia disappeared, on March 10th. It was a bank ATM transaction receipt from the Government Employees Credit Union, GECU, and this bank was only minutes from Sophia's house in El Paso. As a matter of fact, it was right next to her high school. It was a bank she passed every day and one that her family and many local residents used on a regular basis. The receipt was time-stamped for 10:23 p.m., and this was huge. They knew that ATMs themselves had video surveillance built into them to record every transaction for the bank's records, but also for the safety and security of customers and perhaps the bank itself. They thought that maybe the bank had cameras outside near the ATMs, so they headed over there with the receipt. Investigators conducted a meticulous canvass of this entire area, everywhere near the drive-through ATM where Sophia had made this transaction. They gathered fingerprints and DNA samples from the ATM, hoping to uncover any evidence that could link them to a suspect. While at the credit union, though, a detective noticed something on the ground near the ATM. A scattered cluster of crushed glass fragments. Carefully collecting these shards, they planned to analyze and compare them to the broken window of Sophia's car. But because of the location where they were found, it was obvious they came from her vehicle, likely from the window that had been smashed. This meant that the window was potentially shattered while Sophia's car sat at this ATM. They also noticed security cameras on the outside of the building. When the detectives explained to the bank management what they were seeking, they didn't even have to ask for a subpoena or a search warrant. The bank personnel willingly began sifting through their security footage, and there were a couple of different angles that caught Sophia and her red Pontiac that night. One clear, color video came from the ATM itself. This vantage point captured the customer's driver's side window and their hands as they interacted with the machine at the drive-thru. It even showcased the transaction information on the screen, including transaction type, amount, time, etc. Another camera's footage was black and white and not as clear. It was from above, on the bank's roof, and it showed the passenger side of a customer's vehicle as they drove through the drive-thru. From this vantage point, you could also see the customer interacting with the ATM. There was also another camera showing a similar vantage point. As the detectives sat there and watched this footage, they were in complete shock. They sat there in total silence, witnessing not only Sophia and acknowledging that they stumbled upon a huge lead here, but they also witnessed some of the last moments that she was alive. They'd never seen anything like this. Remember, this was the year 2000. Nowadays, it's common for all of us to have video cameras right in our phones, and all kinds of crimes are captured on camera. But back then, seeing a crime carried out on video like this was not something they'd ever seen before, especially not in this detail. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very detailed. The detectives wouldn't have to assume what happened because they were about to see it go down a T, 10 hours, 22 minutes and 21 seconds, which is 10:22 and 10 seconds, when Sophia's red Pontiac is seen pulling up to the ATM. She proceeds to stop, rolls down her driver's side window, and at 10 hours, 22 minutes and 23 seconds, she's punching in her code and interacting with the ATM. In just under 30 seconds, she had withdrawn $20 from her checking account and taken a receipt from the machine. For the next minute or so, the cameras capture her smiling. She looks happy and content, just putting away her cash, putting her seatbelt back on, checking her hair in the mirror, putting on some lipstick. There's no one behind her. So it's something that so many of us have felt completely safe doing in the comfort of our own car before we drive off to our destination. The club was only about 10 minutes away, but just 2 minutes after Sophia initially pulled up to the ATM, and before she had a chance to pull away, investigators see an eerie image on the bottom portion of the screen. At 10 hours 24 minutes and 3 seconds, there's a man that emerges wearing all black clothing and a black beanie. He's walking near the back passenger side of Sophia's car, and she is oblivious. What's terrifying is that it's so obvious that this person is holding a gun. Within mere seconds you can see him, right next to the driver's side of the car. I wish I could yell to Sophia to drive away, just leave, just get out of there now, but there's no one there to help her. The man is creeping, leaning up to her window, and by 10 hours 24 minutes and 10 seconds, just 7 seconds after he first appeared. Think about how fast this actually happened. He's next to her window. A different camera shows him pointing a gun right through Sophia's open window, within inches of her face. Can you even imagine? It is unbelievable. She's 18, she's all alone, and now at gunpoint. There's no sound on these cameras, but it seems like without warning, the man shoots his gun. There's a flash scene coming from the muzzle, and then the passenger side window cracks. It's shattered, but the glass does not fall out into pieces. Sophia had been shot in the face, around her nose area. Now, this could have been the bullet that grazed her. Maybe it came from the side and went through her cheek area and out the window, because we know the window was shattered. Another bullet was found where her body was found, but this is just unreal. It happened within seconds, and it's so hard to believe that something like this and someone like this killer exists. But Sophia did not die from this injury. It was a small caliber weapon. Sophia was very much alive after the first shot. The man was grabbing Sophia's door handle at the same time, but it was locked. At this point, she's grabbing her face, bleeding, and her head is hung in a downward position. At 10 hours, 24 minutes and 12 seconds, just seconds later, he's trying to pull on the handle of the driver's side back door, and it opens. He's standing there about to get inside the back seat of this car, with a gun in his hand. He closes the door, and he's now inside the vehicle behind Sophia. Just seconds later, she's seen holding a napkin to her face, trying to stop the blood. Then she's seen at 10 hours 24 minutes and 27 seconds, making a second withdrawal from the ATM, and this time it's for $200. What I found was so sad, other than, of course, this entire horrific crime that is taking place, is that Sophia only had about $250 in her bank account. This man is just ruthless, asking her to empty it of $200, which she probably worked so hard for and would have gladly handed over to him without him shooting her. By 10:25 and 45 seconds, Sophia is seen driving out of the bank ATM lane and leaving the parking lot with the perpetrator inside the back of her car. Where she went, no one knows, but they know where she and the car ended up. This is heartbreaking. Over what? A measly $200. But we know there's more, because the DNA was found in that essay kit that was taken from her body. They know that this man, or an accomplice if he had one, forced Sophia into intercourse, as well as shot her at least 4 more times. Investigators wonder, who is this guy? Is this someone that Sophia knew? Was it a stranger? Was she targeted, or was this random? As you can possibly imagine, this was not easy for any of the detectives to watch. Anyone that was on this case and had to endure looking at everything that unfolded in this video was affected for the rest of their life. Many of these people have families, they have children of their own, and thinking that they just witnessed a young woman's life being taken in such a callous manner, it was hard to believe, and they wanted to catch this monster more than ever. I happened within a 2-minute time frame. She was doing something innocent, just grabbing a few bucks before going out. And poor Sophia, she did everything the monster asked of her. She gave him all the money that she had or was able to withdraw at that ATM. It's surprising that he opened fire on her as soon as he came to that window, without even letting her just hand over her wallet, her money, or even her car, and letting her live. That's what made this case so much harder to think about, because we watched it unfold, or at least we watched some of it. The investigators knew much more. They immediately ran the DNA against Codis, but unfortunately, they do not get a hit. So this man who violated Sophia was not in the criminal database, and that is a letdown. All they had were these not-so-good quality, grainy, still images of this man that they could give to the media. What it looked to them was that he appeared to be a white male with a thin stature, about 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 9 inches, and he might have some facial hair. The detectives knew that they had to go public with all of this and see if anyone could possibly recognize this man through this image. They then held a press conference explaining what happened to Sophia, and they released the image of this man wearing all black and carrying the gun. They also issued several warnings to the public regarding the potential risks and dangers associated with using ATMs, informing the public that they need to take precautions so that they can stay safe. And, I do understand that they need to warn the public, but when I heard them speaking and read all these articles in the newspaper about safety at ATMs, it seemed pretty obvious. Someone could easily come up and grab it, or they can grab you or hurt you just for the money. But the tips just seemed, almost insensitive, like they were almost victim blaming. But it is important to be safe. For example, the police highlighted that individuals should keep their engine running so they could drive away really fast. Well, that didn't help Sophia. Then they said you should lock your doors and your windows, but this man shot through one of the windows, and had Sophia's driver's side one been closed, I'm sure he would have shot through that one too. He shot her in the face. She didn't really have that much time to even process what was happening. The police also warned the public to avoid ATMs with poor lighting and obstructed views. And true, but this was after the fact. Usually when we're looking for an ATM close to us, that's what we're looking for. Location and just one that's open. There was no GPS back then to go look for other locations. Sophia went to the one that was open 24 hours a day, close to her home, and it did have cameras. The police also advised looking around for any suspicious people or activities, but there was no one there when Sophia pulled up. It was only afterward. However, the next tip could apply. They instructed customers not to idle in the teller line and to drive away promptly. And I have to say, I learned this as a child as I got older. Driving with my grandma or mom, they would say, "Don't dilly-dally in parking lots or getting out of your car. Just drive. Don't look at yourself in the mirror, don't fuss with your stuff, do it later." But that's not Sophia's fault. It's not her fault what happened to her. And the very last tip that police gave was to drive away if being followed. But clearly in Sophia's case, this man got inside of her car, so driving away didn't help either. He made her drive away. It was just so terrible, and this news only ignited more panic and fear throughout El Paso. Everyone worried that this person was now stalking ATMs looking for people to rob. The ATM that Sophia had used was renovated soon after her murder. They installed brighter lights to deter criminals, and they even added more visible and obvious cameras to the building. But again, I don't think any of that would have mattered. In the end, I think what this person did to Sophia they would have done no matter what. As hard as it was, Sophia's family actually watched the videos from the bank, and they saw her. They saw her smiling, excited for her night out, and then they watched in complete horror as she was pulling down the visor, looking in the mirror, and putting on some eyeliner. It was in that moment of distraction that this monster came out of nowhere. After the detectives released the image of Sophia's suspected murderer to the public, tips, of course, started to flood in. I looked at it again and again, and I wondered to myself, and now to you, if I would be able to identify someone from an image like this. You tell me, if you knew a person, and you only saw this image, would you be able to tell? The area where Sophia's body had been found stumbled upon a driver's license of another woman. Luckily, she made it out of her situation alive and explained that her purse had been snatched from her at a local mall. We know that Sophia worked at a local mall, and this woman who had her purse snatched had no idea how her ID got all the way out in the desert. The assumption was that the thief basically just dumped it out there, and kept whatever was valuable from this person's purse. What's interesting is that as soon as the media started running with the story of the purse snatcher, the man who took this woman's purse actually came forward and turned himself in. He didn't want to be associated with Sophia's murder. He claimed he had nothing to do with what happened to Sophia, but he wanted to make that very clear and at the same time say, yes, I did rob this woman of her purse. His name was Josh Valenzuela, and he claimed he wasn't involved, but there were so many similarities between this robbery and Sophia's murder. Both young women were robbed in public places, and it raised suspicions. But Josh willingly provided samples of his DNA, and his physical appearance did not match the suspect in the security video from the ATM. It turns out the DNA was not a match to the DNA recovered from Sophia's body, and Josh was cleared as a suspect in her murder. But every time this happens, where the DNA from a sexual crime doesn't match the DNA found at a murder scene, there's always just a part of me that wonders, how do you know that the sexual assault wasn't part of the crime? Maybe it happened elsewhere, wasn't related, or happened before with somebody else. Or maybe there were two perpetrators. So sometimes I just think they rule people out a little too quickly when the DNA doesn't match. But I'm not an investigator. Time was passing, months had gone by, and still no leads. In July, a string of very violent carjackings had occurred, including one with a couple who had been attacked in their car when they were parked at a scenic outlook in El Paso known as Lover's Lane. They were shot from the passenger side window of their car by two men, and they were both shot in the face. By some sort of miracle, they both survived and were able to identify one of the men who did this to them. When he was located, he quickly ratted out his accomplice. Now this did look really promising. It was Ruben Perez and Joseph Leno, and they were brought in for questioning. But again, the DNA didn't match the DNA in Sophia's case. And again, like I said before, I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. There are scenarios in my head where I'm like, it doesn't really mean they should be ruled out just because the DNA doesn't match. But I digress. 6 months went by and everyone was thinking that this was going to be a cold case. They knew how transient this area was. It was right near the border, and so many people could have possibly come and then gone back somewhere, even to Mexico, and maybe they would never find Sophia's killer. Her sister, Marianne, was only 16 when all of this was going on, and she was having nightmares. Her mom was also having dreams about Sophia, where Sophia would actually speak to them. Marianne even started to think that she was seeing Sophia out and around town. She would see a woman, and they were walking, and she could only see them from the back. Marianne would actually go up to these women and tap them on the shoulder, even though she knew that it wasn't going to be her sister. There was just something inside of her that made her do it, just so that she could kind of prove to herself that her sister was truly gone. When I read that, I was just so sad and heartbroken for her. I can't even possibly begin to imagine how heartbreaking this was for this family, how traumatizing it was for Moran to be a teenager, knowing that her sister wasn't coming back. And Sophia's older sister, Dulce, found it so difficult to even see advertisements for things like prom gowns in magazines, because she wondered what dress her sister would have picked out. Sophia's friends, they weren't excited about prom anymore, graduation, or any other senior year milestones because Sophia was supposed to celebrate with them. Dulce was invited to accept Sophia's diploma, but the family wasn't really sure they were ready yet. The senior class decorated luminarias in Sophia's memory, creating a really beautiful tribute to her. Everyone who loved Sophia did their best to raise awareness about what happened to her. Her family didn't want anyone to forget her, so they even started to make these red ribbons, and they would put them all over. They would wear them, put them on cars, place them on their car antennas, and hand them out to people outside of Walmart. They aimed to send a message to Sophia's murderer, to put them on notice that they were never going to forget what he did. They hoped that someone would come forward with information. At this point, the FBI had joined the investigation. The El Paso Police Department's Crimes Against Persons unit assigned 8 detectives, 2 sergeants, and 1 lieutenant to Sophia's case. The El Paso Crime Stoppers even offered an $11,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Sophia's murderer. In the meantime, the local community did not stand by idly. A local radio station that I talked about, Power 102, was loved by Sophia herself. She listened to it, and they decided to act. They organized a fundraising campaign and raised over $27,000 to support this reward. There was even more money coming in for this reward fund from everyone, even a 4-year-old little boy who offered his piggy bank and his little savings to contribute to this fund. Additionally, there was an eye doctor in the area who pledged $1,000 towards the reward fund. Sophia's family couldn't thank everyone enough. They even called the radio station to express gratitude and let them know that the reward fund had actually surpassed $40,000 with their help. To show their support further, the local dance troupe, the Blue Unicorns, and the Bido Martial Arts Studio organized a benefit dance for the reward fund as well. The entire community united to bring justice to Sophia and her family. Even John Walsh and his entire crew from the popular TV show America's Most Wanted traveled to El Paso, Texas, to film a segment about Sophia's murder. They hoped that it would raise awareness about this case and generate new leads. But unfortunately, it did not result in any significant breakthroughs in the case. Then I thought to myself, can you imagine if they hadn't found that receipt in her car? Imagine if the killer had taken that with him. We wouldn't have gotten this far because they would have never known what happened on that camera footage. It could have even possibly been erased by the time they put all the pieces together. And then, when the detectives working on Sophia's murder were not expecting it, a real tip came in. The FBI received information, and it was actually Lieutenant McBain's cousin who called him. He was an FBI agent in El Paso, and he called to let them know that there was a woman who had come forward claiming that she had information about the case. I mean, of course they'd heard this so many times, hundreds of times, they didn't even know if this tip was credible. But 2 detectives interviewed this woman at the FBI headquarters. However, when the detectives on Sophia's case got there, the first thing the woman wanted to know about was the $51,000 reward for information that could lead to an arrest. That's all she was there for. But they do say that many cases would not ever be solved unless a reward is offered, and that's why this woman had come forward, it seemed. But the fact that she was so driven by the money actually did catch the detectives off guard a bit. They were trying to wonder if maybe there was some kind of other motive for her coming forward, but they decided to go ahead with the interview, thinking that maybe she could tell them something that only the killer would have known. And I'm just going to tell you now, she's about to drop a major bombshell. It's going to be the biggest break in this entire case, and it's going to lead right to the killer. So I think it's safe to say it probably was worth her getting that $51,000, which she did receive. Because, let's face it, if it does lead to an arrest, then you get the money. The woman who came forward was only 20 years old. Her name was Heather Hawass, and maybe to look not so insensitive, she says, "Oh well, of course, yeah, I'm here for the cash reward." But there's another reason why she came forward. Now she claimed to be having nightmares about the entire situation, and also because she told them one of the perpetrators she claimed was now behind bars on a different offense. So she felt safe to come forward, and that person was actually her husband, Michael Hawass. Well, now he was her estranged husband, but the story she's about to tell is just insane. The first thing she does is she hands over Sophia's driver's license, but it didn't look like it used to. It was basically burned, like it had been thrown in a fire. Once the detectives see that she's in possession of this license, they're on high alert. They sat there for a few hours and Heather tells them everything that I'm about to tell you now. She did write a 5-page statement on September 30th of the year 2000. This is still the year 2000, just 7 months after Sophia's murder. Now, if you've been here before, you might know I do not like reading direct quotes. I'm not going to sit here and read you a 5-page written statement. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what was said in the statement and how everything went down, according to what Heather knows or witnessed, or what was told to her by her husband. Her husband has told her this information, and now she's telling detectives in Ovesday. So here it goes. Heather explained that she decided to come forward because she's having these bad dreams about Sophia's murder, and that she's been physically ill ever since she found out what happened. First, she explained it all started back in March when she went into the hospital for a kidney infection while she was pregnant. It was around the evening of March 10th that she said her husband, Michael, and his best friend from childhood, a man named William Joseph Berkeley, were with her at the hospital, and they were all in her hospital room, chatting and hanging out. At the time, William had been living with her and Michael and their 2 children from January until March 12th, so 2 days after the murder occurred. And there's a reason for that. Well, back on March 10th, this is the night that Sophia was killed. Heather couldn't leave or do anything that night because clearly she was being hospitalized. So she's sitting in her hospital bed, she's listening in to what her husband Mike and his best friend Will are talking about, and she heard Mike say something about going to make some money. Heather was assuming they were going to be selling some drugs because her husband used to do that. She said they left when the sun started to go down, and she does remember that right before they left, Will grabbed a box of latex gloves that were in the hospital room. And he also took with him like some packets of lubricant. She literally turned to him and said, "Why are you taking that stuff?" And Will just looked back at her and said, "Because," and they left. That is weird. Lube, and it's like KY jelly and gloves. It's kind of odd. Heather said she remembered them leaving maybe around 7 p.m., and she doesn't remember Mike coming back to her room until later that night. It was around 10 p.m., and she knows it was around that time because she was watching TV in her hospital room. She looked up, the news was on, and it had that local time running across the screen. Heather says that her husband Mike told her that he and Will had robbed someone at an ATM at the credit union across the street from where there were a couple of car dealerships. Now, this is right near the location of the GCU ATM where we know Sophia was that night. Now, it's a Mercedes-Benz and a Volkswagen dealership. I don't know what kind of dealerships they were back then, but Heather goes into detail about what Mike told her happened that night at the ATM. According to Mike, who's now relaying the story to Heather, and she's repeating it in a written statement, so almost like a game of telephone, Mike told her that Will committed the robbery and that he walked over to the ATM. He was hiding in the bushes, waiting for a car to pull up. At this time, Mike was waiting in a parking lot of a pool hall called the Click Billiards, and he was just there, ready to pick Will up after he got the money from someone. Mike said that he saw a car pull up to the ATM. It was a red car. The driver then put the pin into the machine, and Will walked right up to the car and fired a shot right through the window. Mike said Will made the driver get out of the car, and then Will took off. But we know that that is not what happened because we saw the video, or at least clips. Sophia never got out of that vehicle, but Will was apparently telling Mike that he merely took Sophia's car and that she was not in the car. Either Mike was lying, or he actually knew what happened. But Mike told Heather he tried to follow Will in his own car, but the red car took off and was going too fast, so Mike decided to just go have a few beers back at the pool hall. He was waiting for Will to come back, but he never did. I'm showing a map where the bank is, where the pool hall is, where Mike is claiming that he was waiting for Will and that he saw all of this transpire from. And y'all, this is a pretty far distance. It's a 2-minute drive. So investigators are wondering how true this story is. They're wondering what he could have seen from that vantage point, and if he really was just waiting for Will all the way across the street, kind of minimizing his role. Heather explained that she and Mike were in her hospital room, and then, around midnight, a nurse came up to tell Mike that he had a visitor downstairs. When he got down there, it was Will, standing in the lobby. According to Mike, Will told him that he still had the red vehicle, that he had stolen it, and that he needed to get rid of it so there wouldn't be any evidence of the crime. Mike told Heather that they planned to take it to the desert and burn it. When Mike was saying all this to Heather, she was asking questions. She said, "Well, where did you go?" He said, "We knew a place out by Wars, and this was near the Mexican border. Then Heather asked him what kind of car Will stole, and Mike told her it was a brand new red Pontiac. Shortly after this, Heather was getting a little bit tired. You know, she's on meds, she's in the hospital. She remembers watching Mike leave, and she didn't see him again until she woke up the next morning around 10 a.m. She said she doesn't know what time he actually came back because she was sleeping, but she did recall that Mike was wearing the exact same clothes he had on the previous night. When she asked him what happened, he told her that they went to the desert and burned the car. But we know that Sophia's car was found in basically perfect condition, other than that window being blown out, and of course, there being blood inside the interior. The car was not found in Juarez, it was found in New Mexico, in Chaparral. Heather explained to the detectives that she was discharged from the hospital that day on March 11th, and she went back home. That night, she decided to grill some steaks out on the barbecue for her family. But at this point, she also told the detectives that Will was still living with her and Mike. Remember, he doesn't move out until the next day. Well, while she's out there cooking in the backyard, Will comes up, and Heather couldn't help but ask him a question about what happened because, you know, she's worried about them getting caught. I mean, her husband was clearly involved in some way, even if it was just getting rid of the vehicle. So she asked, "What are you going to do if this girl says something? She might have seen your face." That's when Will turned to her and said, "I'm sure she saw my face." He then produced the driver's license. He actually handed Sophia's license to Heather. She looked at the picture on the driver's license, read the name Sofia Martinez, and noticed the ID had that distinct banner that read, "Under 21." Heather explained to the detectives that when she saw this picture of the young girl, she thought she was really pretty. She even commented on her hairstyle, and she was confused as to why they would be in possession of her driver's license. That's when Mike explained to her that they had to take the driver's license so that this woman would know that if she said anything, they knew where she lived. But we know that at some point, Sophia had been killed, so she wasn't going to be able to talk at all anyway. So it sounds like there's a lot of missing information to the story, but this is all the detectives have to go off of. Heather told the detective that she began getting a little more suspicious of the entire situation, especially because she was noticing little things like the fact that Will had shaved all of his hair and all of his facial hair. He was basically bald with no facial hair anymore. Heather was now on guard. She was taking a deeper look at things and noticing anything unusual that maybe she hadn't noticed before. That's when she saw this keychain that she had never seen in her house before that day. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, and she asked Mike about it. She said, "Where did that come from?" He admitted that he took it from the girl's car keys. It was a leather keychain, and it had the word Pontiac on it. When she looked at it, she noticed that Mike's house key was already on this set of keys. And, you know, I was sitting here thinking, that really looks like more of a trophy, but it also made Heather think that her husband was way more involved than he was making it look like. Heather said she continued cooking the steaks on the grill outside, and Will was smoking a cigarette. Then, all of a sudden, she saw him throw the girl's driver's license into the grill. She was watching as it just burned. She didn't know what to do. Will was just standing there watching it burn until it was completely melted. But what she noticed the most was that her husband and his best friend were acting like this wasn't even a big deal at all. Like nothing had happened. They were just out there having a good time, laughing, carrying on, just like they always had. But it wasn't long until the news was reporting on not just the kidnapping and robbery of Sofia Martinez, but that she had been murdered. And that is when Heather put two and two together. She remembered the picture on that driver's license as soon as Sophia's picture was portrayed on the news. Heather claimed to the detective that she was hysterical, that she couldn't hold back. She confronted her husband, and he told her not to ask any more questions, to leave it alone. Then, he told her to go out there and clean that entire grill so that no evidence was left in there in case the police came knocking. So she said she took all the ashes out of the grill, put them into a plastic bag, and then threw the plastic bag into a dumpster. So now this woman was destroying evidence, but she's come forward, and this is probably another reason she was compelled to do so in case she was implicated as well. She said that day, she and her husband had to go to court, and he had to take care of a charge for writing a bad check. When they were finished, she saw that he had about $200 in 20s. She asked him where he got the money, and he said it came from the girl that they robbed. So this is adding up, $200 in 20s, taken from the ATM. That was the exact amount that Sophia withdrew. This is when Heather wondered why her husband would be in possession of this money if he claimed it was Will who was responsible for stealing it. Of course, at this point, Heather is even more on high alert, and she's watching the news, keeping up with the story. That's when she noticed that they released that still image from the CCTV footage from the bank. It dawned on her that that was Will. That's why he shaved his head and his facial hair. She was actually able to recognize him from that footage. Now she's looking around their entire house for any other clues, and she stumbles upon a shirt that Will was wearing on the CCTV footage. It was inside her husband's closet. When she confronted Mike about it, he said to get rid of it. She wanted to let the authorities know that even though she had been sitting on this information for months, she finally came forward. She was scared of her husband. He had threatened her, and she didn't want to come forward because she didn't think she was safe. But now that he was in jail, she felt that it was time, especially because she was the one who put him there. This wasn't the first time that 23-year-old Mike had been in trouble. He had a criminal record that dated all the way back to 1996. On September 5th, he violated his probation and also wrote a bad check. But the reason he was in jail again was because of a charge of family violence. He had become physical with Heather sometime at the end of March, and she reported him. Mike said that he did not want her to go to the police unless he was with her, and Heather believed the reason why was because he wanted to collect the reward. After all, he was the one who told Heather about it. That same day, the detectives went to the jail where Mike was being held. They took him out and drove him over to the El Paso police station. He was placed in an interview room and confronted about everything they now knew from his estranged wife. They noticed right away that Mike matched the description of the man in the video. He was about 6 foot tall, thin, maybe 145 to 150 pounds. It could have been him in that footage. As experienced criminal investigators, they expected Mike to be a really tough person to get a confession from. But as soon as he sat down, he surprised them by breaking almost immediately. He admitted to being involved in Sophia's murder, but he insisted he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. So, he's not the one in the video, he's not the one who went up to the car, he's not the one who killed her, but he's involved. He gave them the name of William Berkeley right away and said that he had fired the fatal shots. Now for story number 2, Mike's version. I hope this doesn't get confusing, but this is the way the story goes. Heather gave her version, now it's Mike's turn. After his confession, he provided a written statement, just like Heather. But instead of reading it word for word, I'm going to explain it. Once again, Mike told the detectives he didn't remember what day his wife was admitted to the hospital, but at some point she needed some of her things, so he went back to the apartment to retrieve them. It was unit number 34 at Amberwood apartment complex, and Will went with him. Mike told Will he needed some money to pay his court costs that were due in the next couple of days, or he would be held in contempt and go to jail. Will told him, according to Mike, that he would take care of it. So as they drove back to the hospital to meet back up with Heather, they were discussing what they could do to get some extra money. They talked about breaking into a house, pulling up to a grocery store, maybe robbing someone that they knew had money. That's when, according to Mike, Will said, maybe we should hold someone up at an ATM, and that's how they decided on that plan. After leaving the hospital, Mike said that Will told him they needed to go back to Amberwood Apartments to a friend's unit, Amanda Kolsky, who lived in unit 134, because he needed to grab something. According to Mike, Will never said what he was grabbing. He was at Amanda's for about 15 minutes before returning to the car where Mike was waiting. That's when Will showed Mike a black .22 caliber revolver, a black pullover sweater, and a black beanie cap that he said he was going to use in the robbery. Now, according to Mike's statement, the two of them began driving all around town looking for possible hold-up locations. They considered the GECU Bank in northeast El Paso, but Will thought the area was too well lit with too much traffic. So they went to a grocery store on Fairbank Street, but they didn't like that scenario either. Finally, they targeted the GCU Bank on Viscount, where Sophia would eventually pull in. The lighting was poor, and they thought it would help them stay hidden. They parked their car by a rock wall fence close to the street behind the bank. From this vantage point, Mike said that he could clearly see the ATMs. Will then exited the vehicle. Mike moved over to the driver's seat. While he watched, Will put on the black sweater, the beanie cap, and then he put on those surgical gloves he took from the hospital. He took the gun with him and went to hide in the bushes, waiting for a car to pull up. Mike said that he also put on a pair of gloves just to be safe. Cars were coming and going at the ATM booths. But then Mike said he saw a brand new red car pull in. That's when he flashed his headlights. Clearly, the detectives know that this is probably a signal that Mike and Will came up with. This person's driving a new car. They probably have more money on them. But according to Mike, he got a glimpse of the girl driving, and he kept flashing his lights to signal for Will not to do it. I don't know if I buy that. Let's keep listening. However, it was too late. According to Mike, he said that later, Will told him he thought the lights were a signal for him to target that car. He said he saw Will come out from the bushes, go up toward the car, and I think that's the portion we have in the video clip. Mike claimed he could not see what Will was doing until he walked to the driver's side. So, I guess he was claiming that he didn't see him shoot through the passenger window. But clearly, he's not at the pool hall. He's on the same street as the bank, just behind it. So wouldn't he have heard the gun go off? Mike said the very next thing he saw was the car taking off. When Will didn't return, Mike realized that he must have left in the red car. Mike said at that point, he drove right back to the hospital to be with his wife, but there must have been some time unaccounted for. Because remember, the story Heather told included him going to the pool hall, having a few beers, and even saying he followed behind the red car until he couldn't catch up to it anymore. So he doesn't seem to be telling the police everything he knows. He said he got back to the hospital around 10:45, but remember, Heather was already asleep. So unless there was some kind of other record, like a camera outside the hospital, or an employee seeing him come back in, they can't really rely on this timeline. According to Mike, Will came back around 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, but remember, Heather's sleeping, so we're not going to know if any of that could be corroborated. When Mike gets to the parking lot, he spots the red car that he recognizes from the bank, and he immediately notices that the passenger side window was shattered. He asks Will what happened, and Will explained that he initially tried to open the passenger side door, but it was locked. So in his version that he's telling Mike, he tried to break the window with the butt of the gun, but it wouldn't break. He had to fire a shot into the window, but it only shattered it. That's why he had to go to the driver's side. Will told him that's when he noticed the driver had been shot in the face. But we know that's also not what happened, because on the video, which the district attorney did not release, there was a flash from the muzzle of the gun, and it was pointing in Sophia's face from the open driver's side window. But here's a clip where you can clearly see a man holding a gun to Sophia from the driver's side. Mike said that Will told him that he told the girl to open the automatic locks, and she did. So he got in the back seat, and then Sophia, according to Will, tried to drive off. So Will had to point the gun to her head and tell her to withdraw the $200 because remember, they needed the money. The detective's ears finally perk up when Mike said that Will robbed Sophia of $200 because that information was never revealed to the public. Mike says that Will then told him that he instructed the girl to drive to a secluded desert area that Mike and Will referred to as the spot. It's a place they're both very familiar with. Okay, and this next part is very sad. Mike explained that Will told him that while Sophia was driving, she was trying to talk to Will to maybe convince him not to harm her, maybe reasoning with him. According to Will, Sophia even offered to have sex with him. Really? But this is what he's telling Mike, and that he turned her down. Then Sophia asked Will if she was going to die, and he told her he didn't know yet. When they got to the desert, he forced her out of the car, and Sophia asked him again if she was going to die. Finally, Will told her yes. This next part is so sad that I could hardly keep it together, and I'm still like this every time I think about it. But at this point, Will let Mike know that Sophia begged him to please allow her to hold a picture that was inside of her purse. It was a picture of her little brother. We know that now. In her last moments, she asked to hold it, and Will surprisingly did go retrieve that picture for her. That is just so sad. In her last moments, that was the only thing she had of her family. She was just staring at that photo for several minutes. Will told Mike that she tucked it inside her bra, and then he pointed the gun at her forehead and fired a shot. Then she fell to her knees, and he unloaded the rest of his bullets into her as she was lying on the ground. That's a lot to take in. Then Will told Mike, forgot this part, that he looked down on her and smiled. And that is so sick. That is so effing sick. It's just, he's a monster. But please remember at this point that we've heard Heather's rendition, we've heard Mike's account of what he says Will told him, so I'm sure you can imagine there is more to the story. There are already gaps that we could even fill from what we know. But to finish Mike's statement, he explained that once Will came back to the hospital with the car, they went to Anthony Gap, and they left it there. Then he brought Will back to his apartment, and then he returned to the hospital. The detectives asked him about the keys to Sophia's car, what he did with them, and Mike said that he threw them on the roof of his apartment complex when he saw the news of Sophia's murder on the TV. He also said that Will burned Sophia's license in the grill. When detectives asked where the gun was, Mike said that the last time he saw it, it was with Will at his father's house on the night, next to the bed. After this statement was written, the detectives took Mike back to jail. They immediately rushed over to Mike's apartment building, and sure enough, they found Sophia's keys on that roof. They tested them in her ignition, and they worked. So this evidence confirmed Mike's account and strengthened the detectives' confidence in his story. Detectives conducted a background check on 21-year-old William Joseph Berkeley, Mike's best friend from childhood, the one who supposedly committed this entire crime. He was unemployed at the time and living with his parents. However, one of Will's neighbors told the detectives that Will used to work for Ready Ice and was previously living with his girlfriend and their 4-year-old daughter. They had a child together, but then Will supposedly just quit his job several months before March 2000 and abruptly left his girlfriend and child. He went to live with Mike and Heather. People who knew Will described him as not being violent. However, he had been arrested previously in 1997 for carrying a knife unlawfully. The detectives were now prepared to move forward and question William Berkeley. On October 1st, the El Paso Police Department executed a SWAT raid on Will's parents' residence, where they discovered him hiding in a back bedroom. They took him into custody and questioned him 2 separate times about his involvement in Sophia's murder. In his first interview on October 1st, he admitted to killing her, but he didn't go into much detail, and his story did not match up very well with Mike's account of the crime. He said that he was the one that needed the money. He didn't even mention that Mike asked him to get money for court fees. He also never mentioned scoping out different spots. He claimed he went right over to the ATM and robbed the girl. He would not call Sophia by her name. He repeatedly just said, "the girl." So disrespectful, but it gets worse. When the detectives asked why Will felt the need to shoot Sophia if he already robbed her of her money, he replied that he wanted to make sure there were no witnesses. Then he stopped and told them something callous. He'd always wanted to know what it felt like to kill a woman, and he found out. It revealed the level of evil and the lack of remorse this person had for what he did. Oh, and he didn't forget to mention how his DNA was tied to the crime. Instead of lying and saying that he didn't have sex with Sophia like he told Mike, Remember that he's like, no, I rejected her. He actually went one step further. He said that Sophia came on to him and they had consensual intercourse. If that was true, if that was even a little bit true, which the detectives, her family, and nobody believes it is, this woman is being held at gunpoint. She's begging for her life, asking him if she's going to die. I'm sure she would have done anything in that moment if it would save her from being killed. So that is not consensual, not at all, and I wouldn't call it coming on to him. It's more like she was doing exactly what he wanted her to do, so that maybe there was a chance he would let her go. But he didn't. He even made an excuse for killing her when he just admitted that he wanted to know what it was like. Well, he contradicted himself. He said that he accidentally shot Sophia because he freaked out. His words, I freaked out, and then he didn't even know she was dead when he left. He said, I do want to say that I did not intend for this to happen. All I wanted was the money. I was going to let her go out there in the desert and just take her car. I just freaked out. Well, Will had some time to talk to his dad in the next couple of days. After their little chit-chat, Will contacts the detectives and says, oh, can we have another sit-down? I have more to say. So they meet with him again on October 3rd, and the story changes. Now, he's not really the one to blame. We could have guessed that he was going to put this all on his best friend, Mike. This time, the interview is much longer, and there's a lot more detail. He begins with, I want to start by saying that I did not tell you the entire truth in my first statement. Mike had more to do with this than I first said. Mike was the one that needed money. He said he needed it to pay his probation, and he wanted to rob someone coming out of a grocery store, or something like that. Well, according to Will, he wasn't really keen on the idea, and instead, what they ended up deciding on was getting a gun, and that was, by the way, also Mike's idea, according to him. He said Mike told him to get a gun, and then they both bought bullets at Walmart together. It was actually Mike who tested out the bullets in the gun. Will said it was also Mike who was looking for places they could go to rob someone. And Will is now telling the detectives that he didn't want to do any of this. It was now conveniently all Mike's idea. Will said that after they decided on the bank, Mike was the one that told him, keep your head down so that the cameras won't see your face. And Mike instructed him to go hide in the bushes. Will also explain that Mike had told him he was going to flash his headlights to signal to go. Will said he even asked Mike what he would do if Will shot the driver, and Mike just shrugged his shoulders and said he didn't care. He actually told Will to make sure that he didn't leave any evidence behind, make sure no one saw him, and if they did, he knew what he would have to do. And I think what you can gather from this is that Will is saying that Mike practically told him in a more vague way that he needed to kill any witnesses. Another portion of his story that changed was that he said he was counting the money that Sophia had taken out of the ATM, mentioning that it was exactly $200, which was how much Mike owed in court fees. He was looking around and couldn't see Mike or his car, so that's when he told Sophia to drive off. At that point, she was bleeding, and she turned to him and asked if she had been shot. He wasn't able to tell, but he thought it was best for her to pull over because he was worried that she might go unconscious. He then said he forced Sophia into the passenger seat, took control of the vehicle in the driver's seat, and I think at this point he's trying his best, even though he's kind of failing, to look more human by saying that he cared about her passing out. But the only thing I think he cared about was that he probably cared about himself. He didn't want her to swerve into oncoming traffic or get pulled over by the police in case she was starting to faint, because then maybe he would lose his own life. I'm really sure he didn't care about her and that she was hurting. But according to his new story, he said that he fired his gun because she was coming on to him, like kissing his neck, trying to make out with him, kissing his ear, and he said he felt uncomfortable. Now this statement totally contradicted two of his previous ones. He's now making up a third story. Remember, he first said the gun went off accidentally. Then he said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Now he's saying, she was coming on to me. Then he said after the gun went off, he passed out, he blacked out from fear, and he doesn't know what was going on. But when he woke up, he noticed Sophia was lying on the ground, and he didn't know if she was dead or alive. He got scared and just drove off, heading to the hospital to find out from Mike what he wanted him to do next. And that's when he said Mike took control of the entire situation. They got rid of the vehicle so they wouldn't be tied to the crime. Will then told the detectives that the very next day, Heather was out of the hospital and they were barbecuing together. That's when he was asked to move out of the apartment because apparently Heather didn't want him living there anymore. And that's when he became suspicious about what she knew, so he confronted Mike and said, "What did you tell Heather?" According to Will, he said that Mike responded that he told Heather part of the story, and this made Will very angry. Will said that he and Mike had made a promise to one another. If the cops came to Will first, he was supposed to take the fall for the entire crime, and if the cops came to Mike first, then he would go down for the entire crime. He ended by saying, "We were supposed to be brothers." Well, you're not brothers, and it's shocking that they were willing to do all of this for, like, a little bit of extra cash. While Will was being questioned, crime scene investigators searched his parents' entire home and found more of the black clothing that was similar to the man on the security camera footage, as well as a black pair of Adidas sneakers, which matched perfectly to the shoe impression found near Sophia's body. Inside the nightstand of his father's room, investigators discovered a .22 caliber revolver. However, I will state that the FBI Firearms and Toolmark Examiner was not able to determine whether the bullets recovered from Sophia's body were fired from that particular weapon. Measuring these striation marks on a bullet, if you've ever seen it, and then trying to examine it against other ones, it's not always reliable. Okay, but let's face it, it's a revolver, it's the exact caliber used in the crime, it's in the place where Mike said that Will had put it. But the big connection came from the DNA. When DNA obtained from Will was compared to the samples obtained from Sophia, it was a match. After this, both he and Mike were charged with murder, regardless of whether Mike claimed that he didn't commit the actual crime. That would be left for a jury to decide, like how involved was he. Detectives informed Sophia's family that they had suspects in custody for Sophia's murder, and the news initially shocked the entire family. They feared that this case would remain unsolved forever, but now someone was going to be held responsible. Things became especially difficult for this family, because there were nights when Marianne would wake up in the middle of the night with stomach pains. This was physically affecting her so much so that when Will and Mike were arrested, it did bring a sense of relief, knowing that someone was going to be held accountable. Despite this devastating loss, there was finally a glimmer of hope. Marianne said that when she first saw Will when he was arrested, she was actually shocked. He looked so small and thin and meek-looking. He was just a young man. She couldn't believe that that was the person responsible, because in her mind and in her dreams she pictured this big, huge, scary man that committed this murder. But Will just looked pretty normal. This made Marianne even think that if he hadn't had a gun on him that night, then maybe her sister could have possibly fought really hard and saved herself. But obviously, she was no match for a firearm. As heartbreaking as it was to hear that, she was holding on to that picture of her little sister when she was killed, or right before. At least in her family's minds, they know she was thinking of them, thinking of her family in her last moments. And even though they couldn't physically be with her in that moment, they were there in her mind. That is actually very heartbreaking. That's probably what pulled on my heartstrings the most about this case, just thinking of those moments. When Will was arrested, he was seen on video saying, "I didn't do it." And of course, there was a reaction in the public. His own grandfather lived right across the street from him. He really didn't say that much, but he did say that he never took his grandson's side. He never put up with his bad behavior. Will's father, on the other hand, refused to talk to reporters at all. He told them to leave his property because they were trying to make up a story. And of course, Sophia's mom, Lourdes, was interviewed. She knew that an arrest wasn't going to bring her daughter back, but she was glad that justice would now be served, and it gave her hope and strength to move forward, because she knew that they had a difficult road ahead of them with the trial. She knew that it was now time for the family to take down all of those red ribbons from the doors and everywhere else, because now they knew that the case had been solved. But it's not over yet. On January 11th, 2001, both men pleaded not guilty. Of course they did. The district attorney, Jamie Esparza, made a statement to the media stating that he was seeking the death penalty for William Berkeley. In March of 2001, on the first anniversary of Sophia's death, her friends and family members honored her by decorating her grave. One of her high school teachers was present and sang the song Amazing Grace in her honor. After the service at the graveyard, many of Sophia's friends came home to her parents' house to watch old home videos of Sophia, and these videos provided an opportunity to reminisce and cherish their fond memories of her that they shared with her. Finally, the trial for William Berkeley began in April of 2002, and wait until you hear what happened. First of all, Will tried to raise money for his legal defense by selling some of his paintings. And I was actually pretty disappointed, pretty grossed out when I found out that his artwork was actually on display at the El Paso Museum of Art. Why? There are so many more deserving artists, not a criminal like this. But anyway, unlike today, when there are cameras allowed in courtrooms, in this case, they were not. Sometimes they're still not allowed in the Delhi case right now. Cameras not allowed. But some of the things that were reported were of course the way that the defendant was dressed. He was allowed to wear dress clothes, a tie, dress shirt, and the reporters who were allowed in reported that Heather testified about everything we heard in her statement. Then there was also a fake model made of a skull, and it was actually shown to the jury with all of the places where the bullets had gone into Sophia's head. In November of 2002, Michael Hawass was found guilty of Sophia's murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He must serve at least 40 years before he's eligible for parole. Heather Hawkes, Michael's wife, eventually did receive that award, as I told you earlier. William had maintained his innocence throughout his entire time on death row. He never admitted to killing Sophia, except for those 2 confessions, but never again. He even used various websites and pen pal sites to advocate for himself, and through these websites he expressed his innocence and sought support from individuals around the world. He tirelessly expressed his frustration and despair at what he called being wrongfully accused and sentenced to death, but the fact that we can see him on camera pointing a gun in Sophia's face is enough for me to know how evil, callous, and violent this person is, and that he's able to harm someone that he doesn't even know like this. I don't believe for a minute that they knew each other, because I forgot to circle back to this, but her family said absolutely not. She told them everything, and there would have been no reason for her not to tell them about this guy she was seeing. So, they didn't believe it at all that they knew each other. However, right before he was actually put to death, on April 22nd, 2010, 10 whole years after Sophia's murder, because, spoiler alert, he's actually put to death by lethal injection, he agreed to speak to some media outlets. A lot of these reporters were hoping that they were finally going to get the whole story, because now he knows he's going to die. That's definitely going to happen, so maybe he's going to come clean. But that's not what happened. I think we could have guessed because this man is such a coward. During an interview with the El Paso Times the day before his execution, Will alleged that he and Sophia met, as he stated, in January 2000 at the old plantation. According to Will, Sophia refused to introduce him to her family because she said that he had a daughter. I don't know, none of this is true anyway, but he described Sophia as a cool chick with a good head on her shoulders. You know what I want to say? Sophia was a family person. Her family loved children. It wouldn't have made a difference if someone had a kid or didn't have a kid. Makes no sense. Sophia's family continued to deny that Will and Sophia knew one another before he abducted, shot, violated, and murdered her on March 10, 2000. But in this interview, Will also made some interesting statements, like this one where he said, "Death is a very odd and mysterious thing. I mean, some people will just kind of be straight-faced about it, other people just get hysterical. This was in response to whether he was scared to die, and I was sitting there again thinking, well, you're probably thinking, too bad, so sad. If you're scared to die, you literally took someone's life, an innocent person. Imagine how scared Sophia was in that moment. He gets to die peacefully, he gets to just get injected and then he goes to sleep. And I was thinking, even if he's just guilty of shooting her in the face, because what we saw in the CCTV footage, who does he think he's fooling? But I've also read that these types of individuals, they can convince themselves. After all those years by themselves in jail, sitting with their own thoughts, they're actually crazy enough to believe their own lies. They commit to these lies and they think they're true. He went on to say, I'm sorry she's dead, but I'm not going to apologize for killing her when I didn't kill her. And if you know me, you know I'm not the kind of person to make light of anything. This is no laughing matter, but sometimes I have to laugh to myself at just how obnoxious a statement like that really is. Because does he expect us to believe that after he held her at gunpoint, shot her in the face in her own car, got in the back seat, made her drive out to the desert, left her there, and somebody else came back, saw her out there, shot her with the same gun, and then somehow his DNA was on her body? Come on. When he was asked what he thought it was going to be like for him to die, he said that he didn't know what was on the other side, but he tries to block it out and not deal with it. And when the reporter kind of confronted him with all of the evidence and everything that I just told you, basically like, there's the video, there's DNA, he was like, oh, well, you can believe what you want. You can believe that I'm a murderer, that's fine. But sooner or later you'll find out the truth, and the truth will come out in the long run, and that's all that matters. Newsflash, Will. The truth already did come out. And what matters is that this man's no longer going to enjoy another second or another breath on this planet because Sophia can't. When the reporter asked what he wanted to say to Sophia's family, he said he was praying for them, and he hopes they get the closure that they need and that he does feel sympathy for them. But he wasn't going to apologize. He said that a few times. He also did a few of these interviews, so I put all of his quotes together. But according to the Associated Press article, Will said that he wasn't exactly sure what happened because he wasn't there. He said that he and Mike had planned to commit a robbery that night, but their plans got sidetracked when he hitchhiked and got picked up by 4 girls and went off with them. He said his only real mistake was that he signed those confessions. He claimed he couldn't read them because he didn't have his glasses on, and he was just being told what he was signing and that his attorney wasn't there. And that's what he thought he was signing, to request an attorney for his last meal. In case you were curious, Will had 2 BLT cheeseburgers, 2 jalapeno cheeseburgers, fried okra, French fries with ketchup and mustard, brownies, chocolate and vanilla ice cream, and 3 root beers. Must be nice. Sophia's family actually came and witnessed the execution. And Marianne, it was her 22nd birthday that same day, ironically. And she made a very powerful statement about how Sophia didn't get the luxury that this monster did. She said she didn't know when she was going to die the night that she was murdered. She didn't have fanfare. There were no witness lists, no chaplain to pray for her, no appeals, no last meal. It's not about revenge or closure. It was about making peace about her death in a way that only comes from God. And that day wasn't about anyone except her sister, Sophia, and that they couldn't be there the night she died, so they wanted to be there to represent her that day. When Will took his last breath, Will's girlfriend Samantha was there, as well as one of his friends named Corey, and a spiritual advisor, Irene Will Cox. Before he was executed, Will thanked Samantha and his friend Corey and asked him to please take care of his 13-year-old daughter, whom he referred to as his princess. He said, "Samantha, I love you with all of my heart and soul. Corey, thank you for everything. Make sure my princess is all right. Death before dishonor, Corey. I think you should continue with criminal law. It's your decision. They need lawyers out there that will fight. Death before dishonor. Warden, let her rip. Thank you for coming, Irene." That was that. The monster never acknowledged what he had done, or even acknowledged Sophia's family being there, as they sat there watching all this. For 2 years after Sophia's murder, her mother kept her bedroom exactly the way it was when she died, holding on to the memories of her daughter. However, over time, she eventually started to move things into storage, and this allowed her to slowly adapt to life without Sophia, and it also symbolized her healing process. Sophia's loved ones believe that she's an angel in heaven, watching over them and protecting them. They see her as a guardian angel to their baby brothers as well, constantly still with them. Marianne actually became a reporter, and she worked for a pretty big and well-known media company. She was probably fired by what happened to her sister, but she no longer does interviews anymore because she's come to a place of peace about what happened, and talking about it again and again only brings up the pain. As far as Heather is concerned, the one who kind of cracked this case, the main reason why Will and Mike were even connected to Sophia, she sadly died on May 23rd of 2016. I wasn't able to find out what the cause was, but she had disconnected herself from the entire case. She divorced Mike right away when he was in jail, and of course we know she was also a victim of his. I don't want to discount that she did have a really big part in making sure that justice was served here, but I truly believe that someone like Will would have offended again, and eventually his DNA would have been in CODIS, and police would have eventually solved his case without Heather's help. But the fact that she did come forward still means something, and I'm very glad that she did, even if it was just for the money. Lois Duncan was born on April 28, 1934, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her parents were Joseph and Lois Steinmetz, internationally renowned magazine photographers, well known for taking photos of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. Lois grew up in Pennsylvania before moving to Sarasota, Florida, in her early teens. Her parents continued their work as circus photographers, and Lois spent a lot of her time surrounded by circus performers, which was very inspiring for her. Lois dreamed of being a writer since she was just a child. Many even say she was brilliant. At the age of 10, she submitted her first story to a publication, and at the age of 13, she sold her first article to a magazine called Calling All Girls. Throughout her high school years, she had been a regular contributor to teen magazines, including 17. Lois had a sense of humor. She wasn't afraid to make fun of herself and make light of more serious situations. She would commonly refer to herself as a shy bookworm and a dreamer. She enjoyed playing outside in the woods as much as she loved immersing herself in her reading and writing. Two of her favorite books were The Wizard of Oz and Mary Poppins. With photographers as parents, Lois had the opportunity to be the subject of beautiful pictures taken of her in places like this barrier island called Siesta Key in Florida. Not only that, but one photo of her was on the cover of Collier's magazine in the July 9th, 1949 edition. Lois graduated from Sarasota High School in 1952 and was accepted to Duke University. That's where she met her first husband, fellow student Joseph Cardozo. Lois wanted to start a family, so she dropped out of Duke in 1953. Even though she wasn't in college, it didn't stop her from working very hard. She wrote over 300 articles that were published in magazines. Lois and her first husband had 3 children, 2 daughters, Robin and Carrie, as well as a son named Brett. After 10 years of marriage, Lois and Joseph got a divorce, and she moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is where she taught for the journalism department at the University of New Mexico, while she continued to write for magazines and support her family by writing greeting cards. Despite not having a degree, she was able to land the job at the University of New Mexico because one of her friends was the chair of the journalism department. Lois was hired as a replacement based on her experience writing for magazines. She went on to author 48 books, from picture books for children to adult novels, but she's most recognized for her young adult thriller novels. Lois has been dubbed the Queen of Teen Thrillers by many critics and journalists, and is considered a pioneering figure of young adult fiction. It's pretty awesome, and she's so talented. Numerous titles have been named Best Books for Young Adults by the American Library Association and Junior Literary Guild. Her books have received Young Readers Awards in 16 states and 3 other countries. Lois earned the Margaret A. Edwards Award, which is sponsored by the School Library Journal and the Young Adult Library Services Association, in 1992. This award recognizes a living author who has produced an outstanding corpus of teenage writing. She explained, "I started writing for young adults because I was one. And you know what? She was good at it. She could really bring the characters and the story to life. Her stories resonated with teens because they were full of angst and challenges with fitting in, and of course the mystery and suspense of the characters being put into rather chilling situations." In 1965, Lois married an electrical engineer named Donald Arquette. They went on to have 2 children of their own, Donald Jr. and Caitlin. Lois and her children from her previous marriage took Donald's last name. This story revolves around Lois's youngest child, Kate Arquette. I'd like to briefly mention her other children because each one of them is highly gifted. Robin Arquette Birkin is a singer and composer who collaborated with Lois on a series of musical CDs for children called Songs of Childhood. Carrie Arquette writes children's books and is the co-owner and editor-in-chief of Cantata Publishing Company. Brett Arquette is the author of 3 adult novels, 2 of which are horror books, and Donnie Arquette is an extremely talented artist. Now, let's jump into when and where this story unfolds. It was 1989. 3 of the Arquette children, Brett, Don Jr., and Kate, were still living in Albuquerque, while Carrie and Robin were living in Dallas and Florida. I want to introduce you to Caitlin, or as she was affectionately known, Kate. Caitlin Claire Arquette was born on September 18, 1970. Lois said that when Kate was born, she had an odd little hollow on the ridge of her left cheekbone. Upon seeing it, Lois was worried. She said, "My baby has a hole in her face." But the doctors let her know she had nothing to worry about and that it wouldn't be permanent. Lois says it was permanent, however. Kate's family would refer to it as a misplaced dimple, and they would joke around, calling it God's fingerprint. Growing up as the youngest of Lois's 5 children, Kate was said to have trailed a little behind her brothers, but she was absolutely adored by her parents. Lois referred to her as her mini daredevil, because when Kate was a child, they were at a motel swimming pool, and Caitlin just decided to jerk her hand right out of Lois's and jump right into the deep end of the pool. Caitlin was described as funny, nice, absolutely clean-cut, and well-dressed. When she was in high school, she was outgoing, popular, and extremely ambitious. She had dreams of becoming a doctor one day. Caitlin was very studious. She was in the National Honor Society and took college courses during her senior year, continuing with those courses in the summer after graduation. Kate graduated with honors from Highland High School on June 14, 1989. By the time she graduated, Kate had been dating her boyfriend, Dong Nguyen, for about a year and a half. Nguyen was a Vietnamese immigrant who had lived in California before moving to Albuquerque with a friend. The two met at a coffee house. According to Kate, Nguyen hadn't had the perfect childhood. Kate described his childhood as horrific due to the difficult journey he endured to reach America. Nguyen was 8 years older than Kate, but she lied to her family, telling them he was only 4 years older. She knew they would not approve of her dating someone so much older. Kate and Nguyen had been living together for 6 weeks in an apartment that Kate rented just before she graduated, using a settlement payment she received from an insurance company after a car accident in California. Lois liked Nguyen. He spent a lot of time at their home with Kate, and he seemed nice. It appeared as though they got along well. Kate was employed as a supervisor of a clothing department at Pier 1 Imports, while she awaited the fall semester at the University of New Mexico, continuing to take summer classes in the meantime. It was July, and Kate was just starting to enjoy her summer vacation. However, things weren't going well with Nguyen. Despite how it looked from the outside, there were issues between the couple that they just couldn't resolve. On Sunday, July 16th, Kate stopped by her parents' home on her way to visit a friend, Sharon. Lois noticed that Kate's eyes appeared red and puffy. When she asked Kate about it, Kate explained that she was mad at Nguyen. Kate always cried when she was angry, and Lois knew this. She told her mother they had gotten into a fight the night before, and things had started to go downhill ever since they moved in together. She had finally had enough and was planning to break up with him. Kate's dad suggested that she move back home, but Kate refused. She said she loved her new apartment and was just sorry she ever let Nguyen move in with her. She regretted that decision so much. Kate's parents offered a few suggestions about how she could handle the situation. I keep thinking to myself, this girl is so young. She's only 18 years old, dealing with a man that's close to 30. Lois told Kate that she could ask Nguyen to move out. Kate said she had, but he told her it was his place too. And then in Vietnam, women do whatever men tell them. However, Kate's name was the only one on the lease, and the utilities were in her name as well. Kate's parents were worried. When Lois asked Kate who this Sharon girl was, since they had never met her or even heard of her before, Kate explained that they met while she was at work because Sharon sold Hawaiian shaved ice outside of Pier 1 Imports. When Lois asked Kate what she had planned for that night, Kate said she was either going to stay at Sharon's or come back to her parents' house to sleep. She also insisted that her parents not let Nguyen know where she was if he called. Lois felt weird about this. She thought it was cruel not to tell him, worrying that he might assume Kate had gotten into a car accident or something if she never came home. But she promised Kate she wouldn't tell anyone, as long as Kate left Sharon's phone number so they could get a hold of her if needed. What happens next makes this moment even more eerie. Kate left her parents' home around 6:15 p.m. She wanted to give herself plenty of time to get to Sharon's house since she had never been there before. She also wanted to grab some ice cream to bring over. As she was leaving, she called out to her parents, "Later? I'll see you later, guys." Sharon had given Kate written directions to her house in Old Town, and everything seemed normal. That is until Lois and Don were woken up by a phone call just before midnight. The kind of call no parent ever wants to receive. It was from the emergency room at the University of New Mexico Hospital. It was about Kate. There must have been so much fear inside these poor parents. They wanted to know everything, but all they were told was that Kate had been rushed to the ER after being injured. Nothing else was explained until they arrived at the hospital. As Lois and Don rushed over, Lois's mind was racing, trying to figure out what could have happened and how serious it was. Her biggest fear was that Kate had suffered a head injury because 2 years prior, Kate's cousin had been in a car accident that left him with brain damage. Kate had been deeply affected by what happened to her cousin, and Lois just didn't want that for her daughter. Here's what was known at that point. By 11 p.m., Kate's car was found off the side of the road. It appeared she had been in an accident, and it looked like she might have hit something, possibly another vehicle. She must have lost control of the car. It veered over the median and slammed into a telephone pole at the intersection of Lomas and Arno streets. The accident hadn't been called into 911 yet, it had just happened. An off-duty officer, Ronald Merriman, happened to be passing through the area right after the crash. He spotted 2 cars parked on the sidewalk, Kate's red Ford Tempo and a second vehicle, a gray Volkswagen Beetle. He stopped to see if anyone was injured. As Merriman drove past the cars, he reported the accident. At the time, he didn't believe there were any injuries because he saw a man standing next to Kate's car. The officer was wrong. It wasn't until he and the young man approached Kate's car to investigate that they found her seemingly unconscious, drenched in blood, and sprawled across both front seats. They didn't move her, but could hear her quietly moaning and crying. After the accident was reported, the first officer dispatched to the scene was Officer Mary Ann Wallace. She arrived within 40 seconds of receiving the call, a remarkably fast response. When she arrived, she saw only Kate's car on the sidewalk and Detective Merriman speaking with the man who had been standing next to Kate's vehicle. Merriman relayed that the driver of the Ford had been in an accident and informed her he had already called for an ambulance. As Wallace began examining Kate's car, while Kate was still unconscious in the front seat, she quickly realized something was off. The way the driver's side window was shattered didn't seem consistent with the rest of the damage to the car. Upon closer inspection, she began to suspect something more sinister. It appeared that the window had been shot out with a firearm. Her gut instinct and experience told her this was no ordinary accident. It was a crime scene. She radioed back to the station for backup. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lois and Dawn arrived and were told by a nurse that Kate was alive, but in critical condition. The nurse informed them that they needed to prepare themselves for the possibility that they might lose her. Lois assumed that Kate had been in a bad car accident, but she was shocked to learn what had really happened. As I must censor certain words, you can imagine the devastation when it was revealed that a firearm had been used. Kate wasn't just in a car crash. She had been shot twice, either before or after the accident. The wounds were visible, one in her left cheekbone, the other above it, near her left temple. This suggested that the shooter had approached from the driver's side and fired through the window. But why? Kate was in critical condition. Machines, doctors, and tubing surrounded her, and Lois, in her shock, asked the nurse whether they were sure this was Kate. Many parents in that situation might wish it was all a mistake. However, the medical staff had identified Kate through a photo ID in her wallet. They were certain it was her. Kate had been somewhat recognizable before the injuries became more severe, but she was now placed on life support. The doctor delivered devastating news. While it was possible, it wasn't probable that Kate would ever regain consciousness. Lois and Dawn were in disbelief. Just hours earlier, Kate had been at their house, walking and talking, alive. Now she was clinging to life. They immediately called their other children to rush to the hospital. While Carrie, Don Jr., and Brett were able to make it relatively quickly, Robin, who was in Florida, couldn't get a flight until the next day. Back at the crime scene, Officer Merriman took down the name and phone number of the young man who had been next to Kate's car when he arrived. The man explained that he had been driving by, saw Kate's car, and stopped to check if she was okay. He hadn't even had time to call 911 before Merriman arrived. More officers soon joined the scene, examined the area, and allegedly left before the paramedics arrived, although there is some dispute over this. After speaking briefly to the man with the Volkswagen Beetle, Merriman didn't question him further, satisfied with the information provided. He was focused on staying with Kate until the paramedics arrived. Officer Wallace, meanwhile, was directing traffic. However, things took an odd turn. When paramedics finally arrived, they stated in affidavits that there were no officers, police cars, or anyone else at the scene. They almost missed it entirely because no one was there to guide them. If this is true, it means Kate had been left unattended until medical help arrived. We'll dig deeper into this later. At the crime scene, police found a piece of paper with written directions to Sharon's house on the floorboard of Kate's car. Using this as their only lead, they headed over to Sharon Smith's house. Sharon told police that Kate had arrived around 9:30 p.m. They ate dinner together before heading to a friend's house to help with interior decorating. According to Sharon, Kate was extremely upset, bursting into tears several times for no apparent reason. Kate had also made Sharon call her apartment multiple times to see if her boyfriend, Nguyen, was home. Kate didn't want to speak to him, but she wanted to know where he was. Each time they called, there was no answer. Sharon called Kate's apartment for the final time at 10:40 p.m., but there was still no answer. As the night wound down, Kate decided to leave. Despite Sharon inviting her to stay, Kate insisted she needed to get home to study for her summer classes. Sharon admitted that she wasn't typically intuitive, but she had a bad feeling about Kate leaving that night. Kate left Sharon's house around 10:45 p.m. in her red Ford Tempo, heading east on Lomas Road, presumably on her way to her parents' house. After learning about Kate's argument with her boyfriend, Nguyen, the police decided to head over to Kate's apartment to interview him. At around 5 a.m., detectives knocked on the door. Nguyen answered, looking as though he had been sleeping. He had no idea what had happened to Kate and was shocked to learn the news from the detectives. When asked what he had been doing that night, Nguyen said he had gone out to play pool and have some drinks with friends. He said his friends dropped him off at the apartment around 10 p.m. As detectives searched the apartment, they found a note on the kitchen table. Nguyen said he found the note when he got home, and it read, "Han, where are you? I know you're still mad. I'm so sorry, okay? I miss you today. I went to my mom's house to return these books. I'll see you. Love. Nguyen told officers he believed the note was from Kate. But the question lingered. Who else could it be from, since Kate was the only one who lived with him? This struck the officers as odd. Nguyen claimed that he had waited for Kate to return that night, but she never came home. He also said that no one called him, and he hadn't been informed about anything. Kate's boyfriend, Nguyen, was in complete shock when detectives arrived at his apartment to question him. He didn't know why they were there, and no one explained what had happened to Kate. They asked if he owned a gun, and even conducted a gunshot residue test on his hands, which came back negative. Finally, before leaving, they told him what had happened. Kate had been shot. Nguyen rushed to the scene, but by then, Kate had already been taken to the hospital, so he joined her family there. When Nguyen arrived, Lois claimed she heard him whisper, "It's all my fault." He seemed to be replaying memories of his time with Kate, singing together, playing music, driving around, and how they had recently adopted a cat that they hadn't yet named. It was heartbreaking to think of everything they still had planned together, not knowing how tragically it would all end. At one point, Kate's condition worsened dramatically. She coded, meaning her heart had stopped. Doctors were able to revive her, but the situation was grim. Lois and Don, exhausted after a long and emotional night, went home to rest, but their phone kept ringing, making them anxious that it could be the hospital. Unable to relax, they decided to return to Kate's bedside. When they arrived, Carrie told them the devastating news. Kate had suffered a hemorrhage that flooded her brainstem, leaving her completely brain dead. The family began to say their final goodbyes. Robin, Kate's sister, finally arrived from Florida, just in time to say goodbye. Kate was pronounced dead on Monday, July 17th, at around 8:15 p.m. Her parents decided to donate her organs, knowing it was something Kate would have wanted. Her heart and lungs went to a man named Paul, who received a rare heart and lung transplant that saved his life. Her liver went to Los Angeles, her kidneys to San Francisco, and her pancreas was sent to Miami for research. The speed of events was overwhelming. Lois had recently been telling Kate how she was going to be out of her teens soon, and they had been looking forward to her 20th birthday. Tragically, Kate never lived to see 19. The loss was unbearable, and Kate's family needed answers. By July 20th, just a few days after Kate's death, a memorial service was held where family and friends shared memories of her. Childhood friend Molly Onan fondly recalled their family vacations together and camping trips in the Pecos Mountains. She remembered painting Kate's face like a clown, something Kate had loved. Kate had been a genuinely happy person, which made her tragic death even harder to process. Despite the heartwarming stories at her memorial, there were still few answers about what had really happened to Kate. The police believed it was a random shooting, possibly gang-related, as there had been a series of random crimes in the area around that time. One case involved Vincent Ray Chavez, who was shot in the back of the head while sitting in his car on June 24th. Another, on June 27th, saw Marvin Padilla stabbed 3 times in the heart after a traffic dispute, with his killer, Philip Baca, turning himself in. Then, on July 4th, Mark Sanchez was fatally shot following an argument and car chase. Finally, a man named Ricky Golios was shot during a drive-by while playing basketball with his uncle, who was also injured in the shooting. Given these incidents, police speculated that Kate's death might be another gang-related crime, though there was a clear difference. Kate was a woman, while the other victims were all men. Unlike in the previous cases, no one came forward to confess, and the police had no real leads except for the one witness who had stopped to help Kate. If it hadn't been for the gunshot wounds, the police might have dismissed it as a car accident, assuming Kate fell asleep at the wheel or was involved in a hit and run. But the shooting made it clear this was no accident. Then, new information began to surface from people close to Kate, hinting at something more. And this is where things get a little interesting, confusing, and odd. Lois would not believe for a second that this was a random crime. She took it upon herself to investigate this case on her own a few weeks after Kate's death. When looking at phone records, Lois discovered that there had been 3 phone calls made from Kate's apartment on the night she was pronounced dead. So this was after the accident, while Kate was lying in the hospital fighting for her life. Was it Nguyen? No, because he had been with them at the hospital, so she knew it wasn't him. And she believed there should have been no one else in that apartment. So who made these calls? Two of them were to one number, and the third was to a different number. The second number Lois had recognized, so she went to check her directory to find out if the phone number was in there, and it was, written down in her own writing. This was the phone number that Kate had given her mother back in March. It was supposed to be the phone number of Nguyen's sister, the one that lived in California. Kate and Nguyen took a trip to California in March for Kate's spring break. They were there to go to Disneyland, and they were supposed to be staying with the sister. Well, it turns out there was a completely different reason that they made a trip to Southern California, and it was very surprising and troubling. Lois couldn't believe it. How could her 18-year-old daughter be involved in a major criminal organization? But it was true. Could this be why she was potentially targeted? It made a lot of sense, but it needed to be investigated a lot more. They needed more information to figure out how she was even involved in something like this. The calls were made just minutes after Kate was pronounced dead. It's a little bit weird. Nguyen was at the hospital. The apartment should have been empty. I kinda said this already, so what was going on here? Why would somebody be there? Well, apparently Kate admitted everything to her sister, Carrie. She said the truth was that this trip hadn't been everything that it was made out to be. While in California, Nguyen staged a car accident in the car that Kate rented in her own name, with Lois's credit card. This was an insurance scheme, and it was orchestrated by a large group of members of the Vietnamese community that Nguyen knew from back when he lived in Southern California. Nguyen rear-ended a car, which turned out to be driven by people that were in on the scheme. All the individuals involved in this accident complained of soft tissue injuries, and they were all treated by a doctor. A paralegal out of Southern California handled the insurance claim, and eventually both Nguyen and Kate were given $1,500 as part of the settlement. It's believed that the doctor and the paralegal were also part of the insurance scam. This is the money that Kate used to rent her apartment, in which Nguyen started to live. Wow, okay, this is intense. She's 18 years old, and obviously her boyfriend is a bad influence. Lois went to the police about this and gave them the information. She was speculating that perhaps this was a potential motive behind Kate's death. She knew that Kate had issues with Nguyen, and Kate had mentioned breaking up with him. She questioned whether this Vietnamese group thought that Kate was going to blow the whistle on the illegal operation. Lois believed that they could have had one of their members get rid of Kate or hired someone to do it. Police also informed Lois that Nguyen didn't have a sister in California. These calls made from Kate's apartment had been to the paralegal in California, presumably the same one involved in the insurance scam, helping stage all of these fake accidents. This was a lot for the family to take in. It sounds like Nguyen was bad news. However, it seems as though Nguyen took Kate's death very hard. He went to Lois one night and told her that he was having trouble sleeping. She gave him 2 sleeping pills, but Nguyen asked her for the whole bottle. Lois ended up refusing to give him any more. From that moment on, she was afraid of what he might do. It didn't matter. Nguyen would end up in the hospital regardless. Only 5 days after Kate was shot, Nguyen took a 4-inch knife and turned it on himself, severely puncturing his stomach. Oh my God, this is a mess. Once Nguyen was stable, detectives interviewed him about why he would do this to himself. He told them that he had been distraught and depressed since Kate's death. He felt like everyone was blaming him for it. Does he have a guilty conscience? I don't know. In the event it was true that he got involved with criminals and then this happened, he would be guilty by association. That's going to be a terrible situation. But he's still a person of interest in the actual crime. Lois visited Nguyen while he was in the hospital, and she told him that she didn't think he was responsible for Kate's death, but she believed that he knew who was. She told him he needed to decide whether or not he loved Kate enough to tell the truth. Lois claimed that, at this point, Nguyen told her, and I'm quoting, "I know, I'm deciding. Lois called the police after leaving the hospital and told them this information. Allegedly, a friend of Kate's had also claimed that, on the night of Kate's shooting, Nguyen had called her and said, "Kate's dead. They shot her," before the police ever even arrived at his apartment. I don't know about this. Sometimes wires can be crossed, but it is weird if true. Police brought Nguyen in after he was released from the hospital, and at this point, he denied ever saying anything like that to Lois. He said he had no idea who did this to Kate. He also told them that his car accident in California was not staged for insurance purposes. Something else happened shortly after Kate's death. Nguyen called Lois and told her he had been locked out of the apartment. Lois called the apartment manager and said, "Listen, I'm fine with Nguyen staying there." However, the apartment manager told her there was no way he was going to let Nguyen stay there. He told her that he didn't think it was a good idea, that Nguyen was bad news. This is when the apartment manager let Lois know he wasn't sure exactly what was going on with Nguyen and Kate. But there had been times when Kate had come running over to his door, begging to sleep on his couch, telling him she was scared. Kate even asked him to change the locks at one point, which he did, but after that, windows ended up being smashed in because Nguyen's friends got in the way. The apartment manager also informed Lois that Kate had locked Nguyen out one night, and he ended up kicking in the door. Okay, yeah, this guy is not good news. He's bad news. Lois asked investigative reporter Mike Gallagher to look into Kate's relationship with Nguyen. She felt that something wasn't right. There were problems the police were not looking into, and they were failing to go deeper. Gallagher met up with the landlord, who claimed or believed that Kate was afraid of Nguyen and his friends. He related to Gallagher that Kate and Nguyen argued mostly about a few topics: money, Nguyen wanting to move back to California, and the way Nguyen treated her. The landlord claimed that in one instance, Kate had run to his apartment, like he had told Lois, and she told him that she was scared Nguyen was going to hurt her. Gallagher took a look at that note that Kate had supposedly left on the night of the shooting, and he compared it to other samples of her writing. To him, it was obvious that the note was not written by Kate, and that Nguyen had been lying to police right after she had been shot. Months were passing, and there were still no solid answers or leads in this case, until November when a tip came in from Crime Stoppers. This identified 4 potential suspects in Kate's case. More tips would come in over the following weeks. Police still believed and told the family that Kate was chased down and shot on the corner of Lomas and John Street. Her car then proceeded to travel 719 feet, cross over 2 traffic lanes, hop the median, cross 3 more lanes, go up on the sidewalk, pass the intersection, and crash into a light pole. They say the location of the shooting was defined by a large pile of broken glass on Lomas and John. However, there was nothing to document the existence of that glass. It was not gathered up as evidence, nor was it even photographed. I keep thinking, is this another botched investigation by the police? The Arkham family and their investigators think that the crime scene may have been altered before investigators got there. The crime scene technicians got to Kate late because they were working at another crime scene where there was a police shooting. Reports state that the technicians were met at the crime scene by Sergeant John B. Gallegos. When investigators dug deeper, they realized that many of these reports were not based on first-hand accounts of the crime scene. They were given to the crime scene technicians from information passed on by Sergeant Gallegos. This man was reportedly a rogue cop. He was known to party at the Chop Shop on Arno Street, which is 1/2 block north of the crime scene. He had since been fired from the Albuquerque Police Department for burglarizing a liquor store while on duty. So could this be more convoluted? Arno Street was right behind the Chop Shop where stolen cars were stored. It also served as a drug distribution center. This was a known hangout for rogue cops, including Gallegos. Several of those cops known to hang out there had since been convicted of felonies. Kate may have been in a position where she learned about some of these activities because some of the cars were stolen by Vietnamese car thieves. The owner of the Chop Shop said that he knew Kate. I'm just in shock by this. How in the world would a girl like her get involved in any of this? Look how innocent she looks. I mean, I'm not sure any of this is true, but why would all these people make this up? Well, on January 11, 1990, 6 months after the shooting, an informant met with police and told them that 4 men were involved in the crime. One of them was Juve Escobedo, who was driving the car. A man named Miguel Garcia was the one who used the firearm on Kate, along with Robert Garcia and Dennis Martinez. This informant also told the detective that Robert Garcia may have information about the whole incident. Just a few days later, on January 17, 1990, Robert Garcia was brought into police headquarters and interrogated for 2 hours. He admitted that he was out with friends on the night Kate was shot, and that Kate was shot by Miguel on a dare. After Robert Garcia's interrogation, police ended up arresting Dennis Martinez, Miguel Garcia, and Juve Escobedo. According to Robert, it was Miguel who shot the gun, firing what he claimed were 3 shots at Kate's car. Police also discovered that Juve had recently sold his car, a brown Chevrolet Camaro. This was significant because, on the night of the shooting, a truck driver reported seeing a brown Camaro chasing a young woman in a car that was said to be similar to Kate's in the area where she would later be found. Later, he told police that he believed there were 2 or 3 people in that vehicle. This tip had initially been dismissed, but it seemed to be much more relevant now. Police believed that the men had been out joyriding and that Kate just became a random victim. In November of 1989, when Miguel Garcia and Juve Escobedo were interviewed, they both denied any involvement in the shooting. A tape recorder was secretly placed in their holding cell, and they continued to deny their involvement. Dennis Martinez, however, initially told detectives that he had been in the car when Miguel shot at Kate. He also said that he had been drunk at the time and hadn't seen Miguel shoot anyone, but heard the gunshots. Just when police began to think that they were making headway in this case, it all started to unravel at the seams. Police discovered that Robert Garcia, the man they interrogated, who provided them with all that information, the names of all the other men, had been in jail on the night that Kate was shot. When asked about this, Robert said that he actually heard about the shooting from Dennis Martinez and that he was just scared during this interrogation, so he told police what they wanted to hear. This confuses the hell out of me. This is a real issue during interrogations. Under pressure, people crack and then they admit to things that they didn't even do. When I think about this, all I can think about is, why would you rather go to prison? Why are you not scared of prison, but you're scared of the police and you tell them something you didn't do? Miguel Garcia, the man who was suspected of using the firearm, had his house searched and they found several weapons, but all of them were ruled out as being involved in Kate's case. The truck driver's statement was contradictory as well, because the sighting of the car chase would have occurred while Kate was still at Sharon's. The truck driver also gave detectives a partial license plate number for the Camaro, and it didn't match Escobedo's. Wait, get this. One of the cops that also hung out at this chop shop, the rogue cop, was Officer Matt Griffin. He had been sentenced to life in prison during this time for multiple bank robberies as well as the murder of a witness. He was arrested 1 week before Kate was killed, although his accomplices were never identified. So I thought maybe there could be a connection there. Then, the man whose knife was used when Nguyen was attempting to take his life, allegedly he was using a knife that belonged to one of Officer Griffin's friends. Why would you need to borrow a knife for that? That's really weird, and there are just so many of these random connections. On top of all that, the supervisor of the Albuquerque Police Department was not happy that Lois was questioning the actions of what they described as their impeccable police department. After Lois began to go public with all the information she had, especially about mistakes that she thought police could have made, a bunch of different families of over a dozen New Mexico victims decided to take a good, long, hard look at that impeccable department, as well as other investigative agencies in the Albuquerque area. The message they were sending out was that the citizens of Albuquerque were afraid of their cops. Police in New Mexico have a long and ongoing track record of corruption. In February of 1990, Dennis Martinez was released without charges, and in April of 1991, all the charges against Miguel Garcia and Juve Escobedo were dropped due to insufficient evidence. After these men were released, Kate's family urged the police to bring Nguyen back in and interview him. They did, and Nguyen was much more open this time. During this interview, he was honest. He told them about the insurance scam and that at least 10 other Vietnamese men were involved. He also said that he lied about being involved in the insurance scam because a friend told him to. It was this friend, who is believed to be the one who made the calls out of Kate's apartment the night that she was pronounced dead. After Nguyen's second interview, his sister and brother-in-law had to come in and get him and drive him back to Kansas City, where they lived. The reason for this was that he needed to be monitored. He was not doing well, whether anyone thought he was involved in it or not. There was something going on in him, whether it was guilt or just being distraught that someone he loved was killed. Kate's family didn't even know that this sister of Nguyen's existed. What Lois wanted everyone to remember and thought was very important for the police was that looking into Nguyen's friends was vital because they were involved with large-scale organized criminal activities in Los Angeles and multi-million-dollar insurance frauds. Lois didn't think that the police ever took that seriously, and maybe not. That's why Lois was compelled to use her own notoriety to get the word out about Kate's death. In 1992, Lois wrote a book entitled Who Killed My Daughter? This book was basically a brief of everything that happened in her case. And the night of the shooting and what happened in the investigation, it was also a plea for any information that people may have related to Kate's murder. With the publication of Lois's book, Kate's case started to garner more attention. It was featured on Good Morning America, Larry King Live, The Sally Jesse Raphael Show, Sightings, and Unsolved Mysteries. What happened in July of '89? Kate left our home at about 6:15, saying she was going to her girlfriend's house for dinner. She also told us she was breaking up with her Vietnamese boyfriend, and that if he called trying to find her, not to say where she was, she would come back to our house to sleep that night. When she left the girlfriend's house at about 11:15, she was chased down and shot twice in the head within minutes. How did the police thoroughly investigate this? They did a good job at that point, yes. And then our family began to find out some things that made us think differently. The family was desperate for tips and answers. I wish this wasn't the reality of the situation, but this case ends up going cold. Year after year, there's still information coming in, but none of it really seemed to be promising. There was one tip in 1995 from a private investigator named Pat Caristo. She was watching Sally Jesse Raphael, and it was featuring Kate's case. She contacted the show and said she had information that she thought Lois and the police department had missed. Caristo had her own private investigation business, and she was the one that was hired by a lawyer who was working on the insurance claim related to Kate's case. So she was looking into things related to Kate already. And as she was reading police reports from that time, she learned that the young man who had been at Kate's car whenever the police arrived was 21-year-old Paul Apodaca. He had been reported to be driving the gray Volkswagen Beetle. Witnesses also reported having seen this vehicle in the area before that. This was the man that said, "I'm just passing through. I was on this well-traveled road, saw what happened, got out, wanted to know if I could help." Police had taken his contact information and then let him leave. Kate's family said that they had no real idea who pulled the trigger on Kate, but the one thing they felt very strongly about was that she was not shot randomly by people that were just out on a spree, having fun shooting a pretty girl in a red car. They believed she was killed because she was going to expose the illegal activities involving her boyfriend and his companions. The case still remained cold. There were no bullets and no casings that were ever found. So there was no way to determine if the small caliber bullets that were in Kate's head were the same caliber as the ones that were in the door frame of her car. If you take a look right here, this is the door frame. The size of the hole in the frame seems to suggest there were maybe two different firearms. It's all too confusing. As Caristo continued to look into the case herself, she came to the conclusion that she believed Kate had not been shot while she was driving, and then veered off the road. She believed that Kate had most likely been hit and forced off of the road, which she claims is supported by the damage to the left member of her car. Then she thinks that after Kate crashed into the light pole, she put her car in park, and then the shooter approached her and shot at close range through the window. This evidence, of course, is all contrary to the police's version of events, so there was so much debate about what happened. Lois claimed that the Albuquerque Police Department had maintained for years that the suspects they initially arrested, Miguel Garcia, Dennis Martinez, and Juve Escobedo, were responsible for what happened to Kate, but they just did not have enough evidence to convict them, and that's why they basically closed the case. An online campaign ran in 1997 and urged the public all across the United States to email New Mexico officials and convince them that Kate's case needed to be turned over by the Albuquerque Police Department to another agency. I agree, a second opinion and fresh eyes is always a good choice in a case like this. In 2003, the Bernalillo County Cold Case Squad looked into Kate's case, and at this point they determined that they also believed Kate had been shot after her car collided with a light pole. They said that due to the accuracy of the shots, it appeared as though they had been fired at close range and not at a moving target. Wow, so why? It seems more and more like it was planned now that she was targeted. Lois would not give up. She insisted that the truck driver go under hypnosis to see if he could recall any more information about the night that he claimed to have spotted Kate's car. This truck driver agreed, and I know this is a non-conventional way of investigating a crime, but I think you're desperate during this session. The truck driver said Kate was being chased, and that she was chased twice that evening, once on her way to Sharon's and again when she left to go back to her parents' house. He said he saw a girl in a car that resembled Kate being chased and harassed by Hispanic men in a Camaro in the same area of Lomas. But he reported that Kate's Ford Tempo was headed west in the direction of Sharon's house, not east in the direction that Kate was driving to her parents when she ultimately got killed. The truck driver witnessed this incident over an hour before the shooting. At the same time, police reports say that Kate was driving to Sharon's house. It just still wasn't adding up. Anyway, they were trying to make it work, it just wasn't. Another thing that I thought was interesting, I'm not against it, but I'm not sure how you feel about it, is psychic investigations. On June 20, 1994, psychic Robert Petro in Sedona, Arizona, taped a trance reading in reference to Kate's case. How do you feel about this? Because I want to say something. In law school, we did learn about psychics and how police do use them. They aren't the end-all be-all, and who knows how it works, but they are used in criminal investigations and have proven to be accurate in some cases. Like I was saying, I guess families are so desperate they're going to try anything. Are you wondering what I was wondering? What was said in this trance reading? Because I know I wanted to know. This was all from a website, by the way, that the family owned and operated called realcrimes.com. It was dedicated to families who were trying to find answers and believed their loved ones' cases included police corruption. The motto on this website was, "Real cover-up and corruption by law enforcement, real family frustration and heartbreak." On the section of the site dedicated to Kate's case, there is a disclaimer that says information from psychics, even the most gifted ones, is seldom totally accurate, as it's based upon impressions received by extrasensory perception and is subject to various interpretations. I've used a psychic before. I pretty much do it all in good fun. Sometimes it helps guide me in a way because it helps me think about things. Tell me your thoughts. Now that we know all of that, this is what was reported by psychic Robert Petro during the trance session. This is what he says he saw. Are you ready? I'm going to tell you when this begins and when it ends because I'm going to be talking a lot right here. This is everything he says he's seeing in this trance-like state. He says, "I see more than one car." The girl is stopped. Her boyfriend is having a very serious dispute with a trio of other young men. They seem to be arguing over this girl, and they reprimand him. They're afraid that he has revealed information to her. One man walks within range of this young girl and shoots her. I don't feel that the car pulled alongside. I feel that everyone was stationary, and then right after the shooting, they left. I feel that the gun was thrown out of a window. I feel that evidence will surface that this group of boys belong to an Asian mafia. This is a close clan, and they will do anything to eliminate exposure. I feel that new evidence will surface because one of the men will be apprehended and will try to make a deal. I feel that the boyfriend is basically a good person but was hooked up with the wrong people. I feel that his life is now in danger. He will be constantly inconsistent with his information. Right in the heart of Albuquerque, there's some sort of garage or warehouse where they're doing alterations on automobiles. I feel that it also includes local people, meaning Mexicans. I feel that they have altered documentation and paperwork, that it all appears to be forgeries. I feel that we are dealing with a lot of different players who are very dangerous, but the brains are the Asians. The obstruction of the Albuquerque Police Department in the investigation of this murder only involves a couple of people. It does not involve the department in general. I feel that by the time the investigation got into the hands of the case investigators, it was already diluted, and all of the evidence wasn't given to them. Those who collected the evidence are the ones who hid the evidence. I feel that the Albuquerque Police Department are standing and fighting, and they are right to do that because the evidence was tampered with before it even got to the police department. The Hispanic males who were arrested were used as scapegoats. I somehow see them connected, but then I don't see them connected. But do they know something? The answer is absolutely yes. I feel that someday a person is going to come forward who's just riddled with guilt. He or she can't live with this anymore. That's when you will get your answers. Okay, that was the end of that trance-like state revelation, feelings of this psychic. I don't think you need to be psychic to put some of these things together, but that's just me. Let me know your thoughts. I want to know, have you used a psychic? Do you believe in them? Have you ever experienced a psychic being correct about something? Like I said, interesting information. I will definitely revisit some of these theories later. From 1989 to 2003, there were a number of reports of possible witness intimidation. This to me is very significant, so I wanted to quickly share some of those with you. Okay, on July 21st, the day of Kate's funeral, 2 injuries happened to people that saw Kate last night. Sharon had to miss the funeral because she was in the emergency room due to a severe injury to her arm that she said happened because her dog bit her, but it's believed that the scar suggests something else. Now all this information is found on Lois's website. I just want to make sure you know that I don't know where it came from, but this is Lois's account of what happened. This was also the same day that Newman allegedly attempted to take his own life with the weapon that belonged to someone else. This happened in the room of one of the men who was one of his alibis for the night of the shooting. On August 2, 1989, Newman's drug dealer apparently ended up with a slashed wrist. They said it was self-inflicted, but get this. That same day, 2 of the drug dealer's friends who were there when it happened also had their arms and wrists slashed. What? Again, I don't know the sources of this information. It was on the family's website dedicated to uncovering the truth about what happened to Kate. But that seems really odd. Why are all these people getting injured? In February of 1990, one of the men that had allegedly been involved in the drive-by when Miguel used the firearm, Dennis Martinez, was found lying in a doorway with his arm slashed too. 2 years later, on February 4th, 1992, shortly after charges were dropped and he was released from prison, Miguel Garcia was shot in the lower portion of his right abdomen, and the bullet came out of his back. It was so close to his spine that the doctors thought he was going to be paralyzed. He ended up surviving. Allegedly, this was also self-inflicted. The last one mentioned on the site was from September 24, 2003, when Robert Garcia, the alleged eyewitness to Miguel in the car, who later turned out to be in prison at the time of the shooting, was found dead of a drug overdose. Someone had dragged his body into an alley and left it there. No wonder this case was so hard to solve, because there are just so many theories and weird things like this happening. But here's my train of thought. The people we're talking about are criminals, and if you don't know by now, criminals get themselves in interesting, violent, and dangerous situations. So it's not really that uncommon for these risk situations. I don't even know. But as far as, somebody in an alleyway or some of these other things, it's like, oh, you play with fire, you're going to get burned. Later in 2013, Lois wrote a sequel to her book Who Killed My Daughter, entitled One to the Wolves, on the Trail of a Killer. There were basically three major theories at this point. The first one was the Vietnamese connection, which Kate's family strongly believed in, but police had ruled out a long time ago. Lois said at one point that since her family started looking into what happened to Kate, they had received several death threats, and that she believed they were from members of a Vietnamese gang. The second theory was that it was those three men who had been previously arrested, but their conflicting statements and the lack of evidence just made it impossible for them to be charged. This was the theory that the police stood by the most. The third theory was that man by the car, Paul Apodaca, had something to do with it. That police didn't do their due diligence, they dropped the ball, and they didn't question him enough or get enough information from him. I'd like to know, what did they do when he was on the scene? What questions did they ask him? Did they search his car? Did they ask him if he had a gun? Did they look if there was any blood on him? Why didn't they do a gunshot residue test on him? Why, when this guy's on the scene? Did he have a criminal record? I mean, what was the proper procedure, and was it followed? At this point in her career, Lois decided she could no longer write horror stories anymore, so she switched to writing children's books. She said that she couldn't continue writing about young women in life-threatening situations. It hit way too close to home for her. Kate's family saw 4 potential motives for Kate's death: Asian crime in New Mexico and California, drug smuggling, New Mexico drug activities, which is kind of the same thing as drug smuggling, police corruption. I don't know why, I guess I do, but I kept thinking this may really have been random. I said that twice. There are so many crazy people out there on drugs, not even smuggling, not even in crime rings, but straight up off the rails. Lois put so much work and effort into trying to solve her daughter's case, and sadly Lois passed away at the age of 82 on June 15, 2016, so she never got to see any justice done. It was very questionable at that time whether justice would ever be done. Lois passed away at her home in Bradenton, Florida, and the cause of death was never disclosed. However, her husband said that she had suffered a series of strokes in the years prior. I guess I just have a really curious mind, but I would like to know how she passed away. Why not disclose it? But most of all, I wanted to know what actually happened to Kate. You're finally going to find out. This case was on Unsolved Mysteries. They were soliciting tips from all over the country, but nothing came out of it until 32 years later, on July 20th, 2021, almost exactly 32 years after Kate's murder. Yes, 32 years. It's unbelievable. You know, all those series, all the hard work that Lois put in, all the speculation, the private investigators, the alleged police corruption, the psychics, none of that had to do with Kate's death for the most part. Instead, a serial killer was responsible. He had gotten away with his crimes for 3 decades. 3 decades. Think about that for one moment. That is crazy. Everything came to somewhat of a close when University of New Mexico campus police officers arrested a man who was wandering around the school property. They thought he was probably scouting for his next victim. Who, you ask? Paul Apodaca. Do you remember this name? Because it makes me so mad to think that 32 years ago this man was right in front of the police. Worse yet, he was right in front of the crime scene because he created the crime scene. He was Kate's killer all along. No, he didn't stop his car because he was worried about whether Kate was okay. Not at all. Paul, who was 53 at the time of his arrest, had a long history of violence, especially against women. He was arrested in 1995 for forceful intercourse with his 14-year-old stepsister. Paul was homeless when the police officers apprehended him, and he was arrested on a probation violation. It was at this point, while being questioned, that Paul admitted that he had a deep hatred for women. It was during his intake interview that Paul came out with a shocking truth, a secret that he was keeping. So maybe the psychic was right in one way. He said, "I feel that someday a person is going to come forward who is riddled with guilt. He or she can't live with this anymore, and that's when you will get your answers." Well, that was true. You'll hear it from Paul himself in a moment because I have that interview to play. It features Paul confessing to his crimes. The first confession he made was not about Kate. He said that he had committed several murders and had forced himself on several women in the 80s and 90s. Now the thing is, police hear this all the time. Sometimes criminals try to barter to get off on other charges to make a deal. However, the police have a duty to investigate every confession or claim, and it took them several months to look into all the evidence and confirm that Paul had information that only the killer would know. Sadly, that information checked out. First came the indictment for the death of Althea Oakley. I know that this video is about Kate, but if you know me, you would know I can't pass over a victim without giving them the respect and attention that they deserve. Just because Kate's case was more widely publicized because of her mother's career doesn't mean that these other women aren't important. So I briefly want to tell you about Althea and how she died. On June 22, 1988, 21-year-old Althea was walking home alone when Paul spotted her. He went after vulnerable women who were easy targets because they were alone. He came up behind her, grabbed her, and stabbed her 5 times in the chest and stomach for no other reason but the fact that he could. She wouldn't have been alone that night, but she had gone into an argument with her boyfriend at the frat house on the University of New Mexico campus and was going home upset. I would feel so much guilt. I know it's not her boyfriend's fault, but it must haunt him, because I know it would haunt me. Police say Apodaca told them he wanted to confess to the crimes. What he told officers about the Oakley case matched the crime scene and evidence. She was stabbed to death walking home near TVI, which is now CNM. He said he planned to rape her because he hated women, but he ended up killing her. After Paul's confession about Althea, a witness actually came forward. And we do have a video. It's a little hard to understand her, but she tried to help her the night of the attack. She wanted to remain anonymous when they interviewed her on TV, but she lived right in front of where this happened. She said that she heard screams, so she ran out to see what happened, and she saw Althea. There was just so much blood, and it had been so long, but she could remember some things. The one thing she said that she remembered was that Althea did not want to die, and that made me sad. That made me sad. She said that Althea collapsed right there in front of her house, and at that point she realized it was nothing she could do, so she just called 911, and they later informed her that Althea didn't make it. I'm going to let you hear what she had to say, but she was just really glad that he was finally caught. It was a lot of blood, and like I said, it's been so long ago, but I remember she didn't want to die, and she collapsed right there. I'm glad that they found him, and I hope it gives him life, because he didn't deserve that. Paul told police that he grew up in that neighborhood where he carried out that crime, and they were able to confirm all the details. Next came his second bombshell confession. He was responsible for the shooting death of 13-year-old Stella Gonzalez. She was walking with a friend at 1:15 in the morning on September 9th, 1988, and this was completely random. He just drove up, aimed for the back of her head, shot, and drove away. I will never understand the level of evil, this level of heartlessness, especially as a mother, that life means nothing to that person. Then in August of 2021, Paul Apodaca was arrested and charged with Althea Oakley's murder. He was charged with Stella's murder in December of 2021, and finally, just a couple of months ago in February 2022, he was indicted for Kate's murder. Police claimed that he included details in his confession that only the killer would know. Paul is currently awaiting trial. When learning of his confession, Kate's sister Carrie, who is now a criminologist mostly due to Kate's case, is still critical of the Albuquerque Police Department for never questioning Paul and letting him walk away from that crime scene. Carrie said it's only solved because someone stepped forward and confessed. That had nothing to do with the police investigation or lack of it over the years. Carrie feels confident that despite the fact Lois is no longer alive to witness Paul finally being convicted and justice found for Caitlin, she feels that Lois's spirit is there, and she's looking down. Carrie went on to say that when Paul took Kate from this world, he also took everyone else. It caused the family to grow apart, and after that, the family was broken. These horrific crimes have far-reaching ripple effects into so many people's lives. It is not just the victim dying, it's the future that that victim would have had with all the people in their life. It's all the people they'll never meet. It's all the things that their family will never get to see them do. To think that people can just callously just pluck someone from this earth and end it is beyond my understanding. I always try to leave you with a message, something important that I learned from this case. I guess the one thing that stood out to me was, never be alone. I know that's really hard, but they always say like 2 in, 2 out. If you go somewhere with your friends, don't leave them behind. I know it's hard. I was just listening to a story the other night. One of my friends said that a friend of hers met a date on Tinder and then left with him and left her there behind. And maybe you're with other people at a bar, but don't leave your friends behind. 2 in, 2 out. You go with someone, you leave with someone. We can't predict these things. I don't think there's any way Kate could have stopped Paul from doing what he did that night, because he was determined to do it. But I guess I'll say what I always do. Please be grateful for everyone in your life. Tell them how much you love them. Cherish every moment, because you truly don't know when it's going to be your last. Today, case, I want to introduce you to Wendy Ann Twice. She was born on June 25, 1952, into a well-to-do family in the suburbs of Connecticut on the New England coast. Wendy's parents were both teachers, and they were able to provide everything she needed or wanted. However, although she lived a pretty privileged middle-class life, Wendy was always yearning for something more. People close to her described her as a wannabe flower child, essentially a hippie and an overall lover of the 60s. She was a bit of a rebellious teenager. She would stay out late at night, and sometimes she wouldn't even come home at all. She was also experimenting with drugs. When Wendy was only 17 years old, she left high school, and that is when her life started to spiral out of control. She ended up vanishing. Her family searched for her everywhere. It was terrifying knowing that she could be all alone, or worse, injured, or even dead. Soon, her family would understand her familiar, yet very peculiar and unsettling patterns. When Wendy's parents finally found her, she was living in a tent in New Hampshire, and they could tell that she wasn't acting like herself. She was out of control, unstable, and they feared that she could end up in an even worse situation. So as hard as it was, they decided to admit her to a psychiatric hospital. Doctors believed that she may have been suffering from drug-induced bipolar disorder. There was this pattern of mental health issues that plagued Wendy. Her family witnessed this for a while. Wendy had displayed symptoms like those of bipolar disorder throughout her entire life, but they seemed to have gotten much worse. One clue that something was definitely wrong was that Wendy began writing bizarre letters to herself and her family. Her family would try to decipher what these letters meant, but they were confusing. It was almost as though they were written by somebody else. They knew that Wendy authored them because she was alone. They couldn't have been written by anyone else. That's kind of scary, right? I'd be thinking, wow, this person may be out of their mind in one way or another, but you care about them. You only want the best. But if you're not a professional and only a loved one, what can you do? The letters themselves didn't even make sense to the family. Even more concerning and confusing was the fact that she began signing them with another name. I'm intrigued by her, truly. I'm sure there was a lot of judgment set forth against Wendy. It's hard not to judge things that we don't understand or experience in our own lives. But I ask you to be open-minded and sensitive to the fact that we all have flaws. We're all dealing with our own demons, so to speak. Wendy's just happened to have a name, Shauna. It's important for me to introduce you to Shauna, Wendy's alter ego or possible dual personality. Shauna was the real wild child. But before I really dive into all that, let me tell you what was happening in Wendy's life by the time she turned 18. She was still living at the facility that her parents had checked her into. However, once she turned 18, she was able to make her own decisions. she decided to refuse any further treatment. She checked herself out and disappeared from her family once again. She didn't keep in contact with her family at all. No phone calls, no letters, no sign that she was safe or okay. It's typical for individuals suffering from certain types of mental health conditions to refuse therapy or medication because they don't think they have anything wrong with them. Their world is familiar to them, whereas the people around them can see this profound difference between what we generally see as normal and what is not. Wendy wandered around, doing her own thing in her own world, or probably in both her and Shauna's world, for a couple of years. About 2 years later, Wendy showed back up at her parents' house in Connecticut, telling them that she had been trying to escape an abusive relationship. This homecoming didn't last very long. In a very short time, she was gone once again, and this time for much longer. Actually, her family didn't see or hear from her until she was 25 years old, in 1978. To make ends meet, Wendy was working as a hotel maid in Reno. She had moved there to try to escape this ex who had been treating her badly. It isn't clear whether this is the same ex she was running from when she returned to her family, but this boyfriend ended up finding her in Reno. He was stalking her, and on one particular day, this ex-boyfriend became enraged. He was following her around and then pushed her into an alley and proceeded to beat her up. This is where Denny Rite comes into the picture, Wendy's knight in shining armor. Denny protected Wendy, he scared off the ex-boyfriend, and in her mind, he saved her life. Denny was from Hearst in northern Ontario. He was the opposite of Wendy. His upbringing was quite different. His family wasn't well off, and while Wendy grew up being raised by 2 teachers, Denny couldn't read or write. He was in the mining industry, working the gold and copper mines. This was hard labor, it was grueling work, and he would travel to places like Las Vegas during his off time to relax and do one of his favorite things, gambling. I found that interesting because his day job was trying to strike gold, while his R&R was trying to hit the jackpot. Denny prided himself on his poker-playing abilities, and he won quite frequently. So you see, he may not have been able to read books, but he knew how to read people, which helped him know when to hold or fold. Maybe his knack for reading people helped him read Wendy that day, because when he stepped in to help her, the moment she set eyes on him for the very first time, they both said that they knew they were meant to be together. However, there was a language barrier. He spoke French, and he knew very little English. Needless to say, they had a hard time communicating, but that didn't stop them from taking a chance on each other. When it came time for Denny to leave Reno, Wendy told him she wanted to go with him. Please take her along. It wasn't long before the couple decided that they wanted to get married. Wendy wanted her family to be involved, so she took Denny back home to meet them. They were actually ecstatic to see that she'd found someone to possibly help her be reined in and to settle down. They were amazed at the story of him coming to her rescue. The two had a small wedding in Connecticut, and they both looked amazing. Friends described Denny as looking like a guy from Saturday Night Fever and Wendy as looking like a hippie Pocahontas. I can see it. Once they were hitched, the couple moved back to Denny's home in northern Canada. This is where he had a job in Uranium City, working in the mines. Even though his job was physically taxing on Denny, he liked having that steady income. The first couple of years of their marriage were great. They were so happy, and everyone around them could tell they were in love. Wendy and Denny ended up having 2 children, Gabriel and Anna. At this point, they decided it was time to pack up and move on. Wendy enrolled at the University of Saskatchewan and was working towards getting her teaching degree, just like her parents. Denny found a job in a hospital as a janitor. The Rites spent a lot of time together whenever they could. They would go on trips as a family, pick berries, garden, and play board and card games. They were described as the perfect little family. Anna was definitely a daddy's girl, and Denny became her rock. He was calm and patient. He would rather take a walk in the woods by himself than go to a social event. He was also extremely protective of Wendy and his children. He loved them so much. Gabriel, on the other hand, was closer to Wendy. She was very nurturing as a mother, and she wanted Anna and Gabriel to have emotional stability in their lives, which was something that she'd always struggled with. She loved her job, working with children. She wanted to teach children how to help themselves, how to speak up and be heard. She even organized a peace project at one point, where she taught students about conflict resolution and respect. After Wendy received her teaching degree, the Rite family bought a property in rural British Columbia, right outside of Prince George. Denny found a job in McBride, also in British Columbia, working in a lumber mill. Wendy found work as a substitute teacher at the local high school, where she was counseling unemployed individuals. Her experience was about to come in handy because Denny was about to lose his job. Things had not been going well for a while. Ever since Wendy became the breadwinner of the family, the balance of power shifted. Denny began to harbor resentment towards Wendy. He wasn't making a steady paycheck anymore, and he wasn't enjoying his work. Wendy, on the other hand, saw no limits on what she could do. Growing up, she was immersed in music, theater, and art, so she was into all kinds of things, from natural healing remedies using herbs to living off the land. Wendy was always a free spirit, trying to find world peace. She had always been a dreamer, spending a lot of time in her head, with a wild imagination. One could say she wasn't very well grounded, no matter how stable her life seemed. She was always jumping from one trend to the next. One day she would be telling her friends and family that she was a vegan or no longer consuming dairy products, and then the next week she was trying some kind of new vitamin regimen or routine. But that's not all. Some of the things Wendy was into went beyond the norm. She believed in the supernatural. She believed she could call upon ghosts and summon them. This is also when she summoned Shauna. Remember Shauna, Wendy's alter ego? Wendy would call her children to come around the table, and she would have them hold hands and participate in seances. This is how Wendy would turn into Shauna. It was as if the spirit would come into her body, and when this happened, she would take on a completely different personality. She did not seem to want to be Wendy. She didn't seem to want Wendy's life. She didn't want kids or a husband. She wanted to escape and be free. This must have been very hard to comprehend as a child. Denny was so patient and so kind to her because he loved Wendy so much. He was the one who could handle her, talk her down, and bring her back from Shauna to Wendy again and again. When this shift happened, he would calmly take her away, remove her from the seance, put her in a quiet bedroom, and talk to her for hours until she would come back to Earth. Since she refused to seek help or get on medication, this was the only method that seemed to work for her, and Denny obliged. But no matter how many times he would try to help her, Shauna would come back. Soon, Denny was the one who was going to need help from Wendy. He was about to have a life-changing event. While he was at work one day in 1995, he got injured. He slipped on a deck that was wet from the snow, and a log hit his shoulder, causing him to be knocked unconscious. No one was there to see exactly what happened, but because of this accident, Denny was left with nerve damage down the right side of his body and severe back pain, which only got worse with time. Although he tried to return to work, he just couldn't perform the same physical activities in this demanding job that he once did. To his credit, Denny did try to find other jobs, but he was 45 years old, did not know how to read or write, and could no longer perform physically demanding work, so there were not many options left for him. Denny applied for workers' compensation, and it was now up to Wendy, and Wendy alone, to provide for their family. It's sad because Denny felt lost. He was 45 years old, without a career, no real purpose, nothing to do but sit at home feeling as though he couldn't contribute like he used to, and that can definitely wear on your self-esteem. However, Wendy and Denny loved each other. They would still look at each other with these loving eyes, and they never even fought. Even though Wendy was a very passionate person, when she believed in something, she would fight for it. She believed in being peaceful and loving, even through tough times. Wendy told the family that they were going to be just fine, that they were going to make this work and be together forever. But it was less than a month later when their life would be ripped apart. On August 18, 1997, Denny and Wendy headed out the door. They told their son Gabriel, who was standing in the kitchen, that they were going to run some errands after lunch. The phone rang at home, and Anna answered it. It was her father, and he was calling to ask if she or Gabriel had heard from Wendy. Anna said, "No, we haven't." He told Anna that Wendy had dropped him off before picking up a few things she needed from downtown, and then she was supposed to go tutor a student, meet up with a friend of hers, and come back to pick him up at the hardware store around 1:30. But she never showed up. Anna told her father that she had not heard anything from her mother, and as soon as they got off the phone, she began making phone calls. She called the police, and they just told her that Wendy could not be reported missing until she had been gone for over 24 hours. So instead, she called up the friend that Wendy was supposed to be with, and then she called up the girl that she was supposed to tutor, and they let her know that Wendy hadn't shown up to either place. Wendy was not the type of person to show up late or not at all when she had plans, so it was definitely not like her to miss these appointments, especially the tutoring lesson, because she took her job very seriously. This made Anna increasingly concerned. The family continued to wait all evening, staring at the door, anticipating Wendy just walking back through it at any time. As it started to get darker out, Denny decided to go back into town with Anna in the family's old truck to look for her. When Wendy and Denny would normally go into town, they would go to a coffee shop or Tim Hortons, so Denny decided to drive to those places to see if she was there. It was at that time that Anna looked over and saw the family's white Plymouth Voyager parked under a streetlight in a nearby grocery store parking lot. She noticed it looked like the grocery store was just closing up, so she ran in, hoping that maybe she would catch her mom inside. However, the doors were already closed, and when she knocked, they told her that there were no customers inside. Anna and her dad went back and they examined the van. That's when they noticed there was a dent in the side that they didn't think had been there before. That was interesting because they thought this might have been foul play. Someone could have taken her, there could have been a struggle, and the dent was made in the car when they took her away. But there was just no sign of anything like that. There was nothing around except for that dent that would make them believe anything like that happened. Denny had a spare key, and they did not notice anything different on the inside of the van, so they ended up deciding to have Anna drive the van home. When they got home, Anna continued to make calls. She called all of her friends, all of Wendy's friends, and eventually everyone in Wendy's entire directory, but not one single person had seen or heard from her. The next day, the Retays reported Wendy missing with the RCMP, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They created a missing persons poster that they could hang around town. It had a picture of Wendy along with information to describe her, and it read, "Last seen in the area of 15th and Spruce Street, Prince George, on Monday, August 18th, 1997. It continued with, "Wendy is a Caucasian 44-year-old woman, 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 155 pounds, with brown hair, hazel eyes, and wears glasses. When she was last seen, she was wearing a blue-green blouse, blue jeans, and carrying a purse." Anna spent the next week diligently putting up the missing persons posters. The waiting was hard on everyone, especially Denny. He could not sit still, he just couldn't do much of anything. He would frequently take these long walks in the woods, and Anna eventually saw him break down and get emotional for the first time during this time. The longer that Wendy stayed missing, the bigger the news became around Prince George, and the more people learned of this case, the more speculations came about where she could be or what had possibly happened to her. Early on in the investigation, police focused on Denny, which isn't surprising to most people, including his own sister, who told him that he needed to get used to all the attention because, according to her, 99% of the time, the husband is the one who did it. His sister discouraged him when police asked him to take a lie detector test, but he agreed to take one anyway. Detective Judy Thomas, the lead investigator into Wendy's disappearance, said that Denny was nervous when he came in to take the test, but he wasn't more nervous than most people are. It's just that nobody knows exactly how to take a polygraph test or how they work. The polygraph operator asked Denny directly if he had anything to do with Wendy's disappearance, and he said, "No, I did not." The results showed that Denny had not been deceptive when he was answering the question, and he was eliminated as a suspect. There still weren't any real leads in this case, so what happened to Wendy? Detective Thomas then decided that she needed to focus her sights on the other major theories and rumors that had been floating around Prince George. Highway 16, more commonly known as the Highway of Tears, is a highway that extends about 450 miles between Prince Rupert and Prince George, British Columbia. When Wendy went missing, that August of 1997, 15 women had either gone missing or had been found dead along that highway. People suspected that there may have been a serial killer in the area, and because Wendy's van was found relatively close to that highway, speculation began to stir about whether or not these cases were related, and that she could have been another one of these victims. Detective Thomas looked into this lead, of course, but only briefly. That was because Wendy did not fit the demographic of the many other individuals who had gone missing or been found along the highway. Many of these women were young, in their 20s, and were either hitchhikers involved in drugs or organized crime, or they were sex workers. Wendy just did not fit into that mold. Another theory that Detective Thomas looked into was the possibility that perhaps Wendy's wandering spirit had taken back over her, and maybe she ran away from her family. Her sister Karen said that it wouldn't have surprised her if Wendy just up and left her husband and children, because she had left her family once before when she was younger. She said that Wendy just couldn't comprehend how doing these things hurt the people that loved her. The Greyhound bus station was only a couple of blocks from the grocery store where her family found her van. Gabriel went down there, put up one of the missing persons posters of Wendy, and then asked a woman working there if she had recognized Wendy. The woman actually told Gabriel that she did, and in fact, she was certain that she had seen Wendy sitting at a table at the bus station. This was the type of lead they needed at this time. It's also the story that Wendy's family believed was true, that Wendy took off because she wanted to vanish, she wanted freedom, she wanted to be Shauna more than Wendy, especially because her episodes had been getting worse over the years. They were harder to control without medication or therapy. Denny was finding it so hard to deal with these mood swings and the personality switches. I feel like it's hard to keep one relationship together and to have to work with two dueling personalities, and not being able to get through to the person you love would be very frustrating. Wendy was kind, she was patient, compassionate, and loving. Shauna was not. Shauna was the opposite of all of those things. Her personality seemed to become darker and darker over time. Wendy's family just assumed that she vanished once again of her own volition. She had done it to her family growing up, so why not her family now? She had left everyone behind when she was 17. Therefore, they believed she could 100% leave her husband and children behind, without a doubt. But why? Why would her own family feel so strongly about this? It was because she so easily took herself out of her family's lives when she was growing up, which really left a mark on them, especially her older sister Karen. Karen wanted to protect her, and nobody felt like they could do anything. Wendy left all the people that loved her and cared about her, even all the people she called friends. With this track record in mind, they believed that she would have no problem leaving everyone behind again. But there were other reasons why people who knew her best thought this could be true. Anna began looking through her mom's papers. She was looking for some kind of sign or clue about where her mom might be or what could have happened. That's when she ended up finding an application for a teaching position in California. This definitely surprised her. Her mother had never told her or anyone else about applying for this position, and after all, Anna was from the United States, not from Canada. Maybe she truly did want to start over. Detective Thomas, when searching the family's home early in the disappearance, also found Wendy's passport was missing. Her family knew that she had also been involved in this religious group at one point, and this group called themselves the Emissaries of Divine Light. Sounds right up her alley with the spirituality and everything. Wendy was always bouncing from different religions, and she was just searching for her place to belong. She could have possibly been discontent because of her duality. This church group also had several branches in the United States, which continued to play into this theory that perhaps she left her family in search of something else, maybe a way that she could be more of Shauna and less of Wendy. I couldn't find any information about Wendy's early childhood other than what I already told you. She grew up in a middle-class family with two parents who were teachers. But it does make me think about it because 90% of people who suffer from this condition dealt with childhood trauma. And there are so many things that can be considered trauma to us that wouldn't necessarily look traumatic to someone else. Wendy had already been running away from home as a teenager, so there must have been something or someone that she was running from. If it was that easy for her to leave her parents, doesn't it make you think that she wasn't happy being with them? I could be totally wrong, I'm assuming here. But what about the fact that they put her away in an institution instead of being patient with her the way Denny was? I understand that many of us are not equipped to handle disorders, and sometimes it's safer and better to leave that care up to someone professional. However, it was just a perspective that I explored, considering that she was suffering from having these two personalities. Whether we understand it or not, having split personalities is a real thing. What's scary is that the alternate personality can take over a person's mind, at least for a temporary amount of time. The original personality or the host personality is still there, but it begins to take more of a passive role, more of a backseat driver, letting the alternate personality take control. Get this, the host may not even be aware that the other personality exists in them, which makes it very difficult for them to get treatment, and that terrifies me. But I also found it interesting, and it could be connected to what might have happened to Wendy. When this personality shifts, the new personality has its own identity, completely separate from the host. This means that Shauna would have her own history, her own age, mood, memories, vocabulary, behavior, and even a different belief system. Shauna may not have even liked Wendy's husband, her children, or her lifestyle, so it's really not that hard to believe that Shauna could have been slowly taking over, which finally led Wendy to be forced to leave so that Shauna could live out her own dreams. In the past couple of years before her disappearance, Denny had seen darker sides to Shauna, and there were things that made him very uncomfortable. Shauna would talk about how she wanted to take people's spirits from them. She would discuss sexual acts and other things that he did not think were appropriate. Yet Denny still tried to be patient with Wendy, because he knew she wasn't purposely exposing Shauna's perversions. After all, Wendy and Denny had been together for almost 2 decades at this time. Anna was only 17, yet she was one of the most dedicated family members looking for her mother. She wouldn't stop checking in with detectives and doing her own investigating. Meanwhile, Detective Thomas looked into all of these factors to see if Wendy had just left on her own accord. She spoke to the woman Gabriel had mentioned, but this time, the woman claimed that she couldn't say whether it was Wendy she had seen at the bus station. Detectives also flagged bank accounts, credit cards, and social security numbers, and they put Wendy on a Canada-wide database. They checked airlines and border crossings, but they found nothing. Detective Thomas looked into that religious group and its branches, but once again, they found nothing. The detective wanted to get a better understanding of Wendy, so she interviewed some of the people who knew Wendy best. She interviewed Wendy's mother, asking about her teenage years and the times she had run away. She also interviewed some of Wendy's closest friends. After speaking with these individuals, Detective Thomas concluded that she didn't think Wendy would leave her family because her friends would say over and over again that Wendy was, first and foremost, a mother, and she would never have left her children behind. Detective Thomas also emphasized that there was something very different about a rebellious teen running away from her family than a grown woman with a family, a husband, and children just leaving everything behind. The last major theory that Detective Thomas had to look into was the most talked about and perhaps the most credible of all the theories: the Jones family. The Jones family were neighbors of the Rites, and just 4 months before Wendy's disappearance, she had complained about them publicly in a local newspaper. Yeah, she went off and claimed that the Joneses had been mistreating their animals and that they had basically used their land as a garbage dump. The family was kicked off their property and they had their animals taken from them. That's a lot to handle, and who knows what that would cause someone to do. It had been alleged that the Joneses had made threats to the Rites, and at one point, the wife of the Jones family sent a letter to the local paper talking trash about Wendy and the Rites. She purposely spelled the name Rite as rat, so instead of R-A-T-T-E-S, she called them the Rats, R-A-T-S. Kind of childish, but still. Gabriel also stated that his mother had felt threatened by the Joneses and that they would shout and scream at Wendy whenever they passed by. So this was not a good relationship. Detective Thomas looked into this theory, as she had with every other, and there had been one particular member of the Jones family who was speculated to be the one who may have done something to Wendy. However, this individual wasn't even around the area anymore, and there was nothing else that detectives could find to support the theory. These detectives, especially Detective Thomas, were just at a loss at this point. Every theory couldn't be substantiated, and the case essentially seemed to come to a dead end. Gabriel, Anna, and Denny had to try to go on with their lives. 3 years after Wendy disappeared, Gabriel moved to Vancouver and enrolled in college. Keeping busy helped him deal with the pain, but he wasn't able to fully get over his mom's disappearance. And one day in class, Gabriel had a mental breakdown. It was terrible, and he ended up quitting school. Anna was living with her boyfriend, hundreds of miles away from Prince George, but she still kept in contact with detectives because she was determined to keep her mother's case alive. Denny went about his own life as well. However, he seemed to be struggling the most. He lost everything: his beautiful, loving wife, his partner, the person he loved the most. She was also his support system, and without her, he had no way to live financially. She was the backbone of the family. Now his kids were growing up and they were gone too. He really didn't have a traditional way to make ends meet. So, sadly, like many other people who are desperate in these situations, he turned to crime. He was desperate for money. This included drug dealing, which eventually got Denny arrested. Luckily for him, he only received probation, since it was his first offense. Unfortunately, he lost the family home and had no other choice but to live in a cheap apartment in a bad part of town. He was collecting bottles just to be able to eat. When Anna spoke to her dad on the phone or got a chance to see him, she could tell he had changed entirely. He went from being a calm, patient, steady man to an angry, emotional mess. Initially, she thought it was grief over Wendy's disappearance that caused this change, everything he had been through. But then a different thought came to her mind. Maybe it wasn't grief that her father was suffering from. Maybe it was guilt. She had an overwhelming gut feeling that he was hiding something. While diligently working to find answers about her mother's disappearance, Anna uncovered another side to the perfect family she once believed she had. However, she couldn't give much time to this discovery at the moment because, through all the sadness, there was some light in her life. In 2002, she was marrying her longtime boyfriend, Eric. It was hard for Anna to walk down the aisle in her beautiful dress and not see her mother smiling back at her. She knew she had to hold it together on her special day. The day was as difficult as it was special, particularly because of Denny's attitude. You would imagine this being one of the happiest days of his life, watching his only daughter get married to the man she loved. But he wasn't impressed. He wasn't keen on the fact that Eric was 16 years older than Anna. He thought they were mismatched, and he was completely detached during the wedding, until a song came on. The song Anna picked for her first dance was her parents' song, which upset Denny deeply. He became so emotional that he just wanted to leave. This reaction is understandable in some ways. It's his daughter's wedding, and she chooses a song that reminds him of his missing wife. While it was a special choice for Anna, it brought up a lot of unresolved emotions for Denny. Anna let it slide, understanding that emotions were running high. This was the first happy get-together since Wendy had gone missing, and it was as though the family had forgotten how to be happy. But they tried. 5 years later, however, Anna's perspective shifted. On the 10th anniversary of Wendy's disappearance, Anna decided to dig deeper and act on her suspicions about her father. As Anna asked family and friends about Denny, she discovered that he had become bitter when the family moved. This bitterness stemmed from having to leave his job as a miner, a job that was the best-paying one he ever had and ever would have. He truly resented the fact that he had to leave. You may have forgotten about Denny's first love, gambling. It's what brought him and Wendy together in the first place. Well, even though he was no longer working at the mines, he didn't stop gambling, and it became more of a burden on his family than just a fun pastime. He wasn't a young, carefree guy hanging out in Reno anymore. He had children and responsibilities. Wendy, who had been working hard to keep everything together and prevent the family from falling apart, didn't care about his gambling at first. She even tried to set limits with him, telling him that he needed to be smart and avoid playing big money or taking big risks on poker games. Especially because, after Denny got hurt, they no longer had any extra money that they could afford to lose. But Denny felt he was good enough to hit it big and wanted to contribute financially again. This meant he had to risk a lot of money that the family couldn't afford to lose. Even though Wendy was known as a very loving, patient person, she became angry at one point when she found out that Denny had secretly put away $500 for gambling. Another time, after he'd been hurt and out of work, Denny gambled and went all in on a full house, only to lose nearly $10,000. Despite these incidents, Denny continued gambling. Even after Wendy gave him several $100s to get some dental work done, he never ended up getting it. Anna had also given him money at one point for him and Wendy's anniversary to help them go out and celebrate, but he never did anything. Both times, they found out that he gambled the money away. Wendy, feeling overwhelmed, confided in close friends and family about Denny's gambling addiction. She admitted that she had been considering leaving him. She even told them she had brought up a conversation with Denny about possibly having an open relationship and that she was considering a sexual relationship with a woman. This was something that Shauna had actually brought up when Wendy was having an episode, so this technically wasn't Wendy's idea. However, she still brought it up to Danae, and I don't know how that made him feel. Wendy was already having trouble taking care of herself, and more of her struggles started to be uncovered when detectives looked further into her disappearance. Anna told him that when she was growing up, she noticed her mom would have these mood swings. Some days she would be really happy, and then other days it seemed as though her world was completely falling apart. In reality, it was something much bigger, and we know that Anna did not know anything about Wendy's alter ego because Danae shielded his children from the truth. Danae's sister spoke about these mood swings of Wendy's, and she said that she first noticed them when Anna and Gabriel were children. She said that one moment, Wendy would be extremely gentle and soft-spoken with her children, and then only minutes later, she would be cold and abrupt with them. Danae would notice the shift in Wendy almost immediately, so he helped Wendy hide it. Whenever he took her away to another room or out of the house, away from everyone, she would come back and be completely normal. Danae's family eventually asked him what was going on with Wendy, and that's when he finally told them that it wasn't Wendy, it was Shauna. Danae said that Wendy told him about Shauna not long after the two had gotten married, so he had known all along, but not until they got married. So that's interesting. It's almost like don't let him know until you lock him down. But he wasn't the only person that had known about this other side of Wendy. Wendy's sister, Karen, said she had met Shauna in the past as well. Karen said she was supposed to meet up with Wendy one day, and when Wendy showed up, she was not herself at all. She showed up in this expensive car, bragging about how much money she was making, and she wasn't interested in anything about Wendy. Karen claims that it was at that point that Wendy told her she was no longer Wendy anymore. She claimed she was Shauna and that she was magical. She described Shauna as this ancient spirit called Doshana. Danae's sister said that Wendy refused to get help with these issues, and just a month before her disappearance, she had left and taken the kids to visit an old friend of hers named Lois. Of course, they tracked down Lois, and Lois said that while Wendy was there, she confided in her. Wendy told her about Danae's struggle to find a job, as well as his gambling addiction, and how it was really hard on her. She also told her about leaving him, and she said she knew she had to make that decision about whether or not she was going to stay with him. She also started to be more vocal with her children about leaving their father. She told Anna that she loved Danae, but she was angry with him, and that she wasn't sure she would ever be able to forgive him. She also told Anna that Danae's addiction was ruining them. Wendy decided to go as far as changing the bank accounts into her name because she felt like Danae wasn't able to control himself and wouldn't be able to protect the family's money. When Wendy went back home, she did sit down and have a heart-to-heart conversation with Danae. She later called Lois and told her that their conversation went well and that they were going to give it another try. But she emphasized that this was the last time, this was the last chance she was going to give him. Lois said that Wendy sounded relieved and extremely happy on the phone. Anna said that Danae had been bothered by what Wendy told him, especially the way that she had told other people about their marriage issues and Danae's gambling issues. Anna knew that her father was a proud man, and it bothered him that his dirty laundry had essentially been aired to so many people. When Danae was questioned by police, however, he maintained that his marriage was back on track and that everything was good. However, she did go missing the same exact day he received his final rejection notice on his worker compensation claim. I was thinking perhaps Wendy was at her breaking point. Maybe she didn't want to take responsibility for all this. Maybe this is what triggered Shauna to appear, and maybe she really did leave on her own to start a new life. In her mind, her family could have been better without her. However, detectives had always had another suspicion about Danae from the beginning. They thought he could be involved. Detective Thomas had interviewed him 3 times in the first few days after Wendy's disappearance. When she did, she noticed that his answers would change, especially when it came to vital facts in the case. Originally, when he was interviewed by detectives, Danae told them that Wendy had no money whenever she dropped him off and left that day. But then, in a follow-up statement, he claimed that he had given her more than $2,000. Detectives also said that Danae never seemed overly concerned or distraught about Wendy's disappearance, even in the early days. However, you've probably heard this before. Everybody grieves differently. About a month into the disappearance, Danae had also been caught on a bank surveillance camera cashing unemployment checks of Wendy's at an ATM. But he'd been honest with detectives about this. He told them that their family didn't have any money coming in since Wendy was gone. He needed money from those checks in order to pay the bills. But all of this information was dismissed once Donnie passed the polygraph and when the other theories were starting to be investigated. Plus, it made perfect sense. They were married. It's not as though he was stealing a stranger's money. He truly wasn't able to go on without that assistance. Even if it wasn't legal or wasn't the right thing to do, he was that desperate. As the years passed, Anna stayed focused on the case, making sure that others did as well. She did not want the police or the public to forget about this case. She went out of her way to make sure they didn't. At one point, she went to Frank Peebles, a reporter from the Prince George Citizen. He had been covering this case from the beginning. She came in with a folder of newspaper clippings and potential leads in her mother's case. She sat down and told Frank that she felt as though her father was probably involved in whatever happened to her mother. Anna had gone to Danae one day after detectives had told her that he kept changing his story. She asked him exactly what he had done that day, trying to get a timeline from him. Not only was he not willing to give it to her, but he got angry and told her he wasn't talking about Wendy's disappearance anymore. If she needed to know what his timeline of events was for that day, she could just go ask the police. This could look suspicious, but it could also truly be frustrating. They hadn't even found a body this entire time, so it really did look as though she ran off. If that was the case, it wouldn't be wrong for a husband to be angry, as much as he may want her back. Even though Anna felt as if the case had been cold, investigators had actually been putting a lot of work behind the scenes. They had the same suspicion as Anna that her dad, Danae, had been responsible for her mother's disappearance, or maybe they just wanted to solve the case and truly had no other leads. In 2007, Detective Thomas decided to pass the case off to the Unsolved Homicide Unit, which she felt could potentially do more with Wendy's case. Ron Barrett was now in charge of the case. He had been the lead investigator of the Unsolved Homicide Unit. He too felt that Danae was responsible for whatever happened to Wendy. He thought he had a way he could prove it, a sting operation that they called Mr. Big. The Unsolved Homicide Unit was used to coming up with these elaborate undercover operations. They had actually completed 350 of them, where they would create a fake criminal organization from scratch and have officers pose as criminals. Remember, Danae is a desperate man who has already been caught up in crime to survive. In June 2008, an undercover officer met with Danae in Prince George. He told him that he was looking for someone to help him with a job, but he didn't know his way around town. Danae, without question, agreed to help him. A week later, this same officer asked Danae if he wanted to make some extra money delivering bags with unknown contents in them, and Danae agreed. In no time, he was a fully functioning member of what he believed was a criminal gang. He thought he was helping to smuggle illegal cigarettes and alcohol, exchange stolen diamonds, and transport guns. Do you blame him? The man can't read or write. He lost his wife, his kids are gone, and his daughter thinks he's responsible for their mother's disappearance. Life was tough. I really think he didn't believe he had anything to lose, and at least money to gain. He even went as far as threatening a man at one point, and standing his ground at a hotel door, while he believed that the gang members were brutally beating a woman on the inside. He made about $12,000 in a few months that he had been involved in this group, which was actually undercover cops, and this made him proud of himself again. Parts of the old Danae started to show up. Gabriel said that around this time, his dad visited him in Vancouver, and it was as though his dad was back. The old Danae was back. But little did Gabriel know that his dad was only in Vancouver to make what he believed to be an illegal delivery, and that it was his criminal group that had brought this old Danae back. 3 months into this undercover operation, Danae was right where detectives wanted him to be, and they were ready to get the actual police involved again. Detectives contacted Danae and told him that the investigation into Wendy's disappearance had been reopened and that he was the prime suspect. This was part of the ruse because they wanted him to feel afraid that something was going to happen to him. They had to force him toward the criminals in the gang, to assist him in getting away, or to help prove he didn't do anything. They also informed him that all those years ago, he had actually failed that polygraph test. This was a little suspicious to me, personally. Polygraphs aren't reliable as it is, but to kind of bait and switch him like that irked me. It was fine enough back then when he first took the polygraph for police to give up and move on to other potential theories. But now that they don't have anything to run with after all these years, it turns out he actually failed the polygraph back then. With no one else to turn to, Dene turned to the only people he had, the undercover officers that he believed to be his criminal friends. He hoped that they would know how to help him or know someone who could. This is when they told him about Mr. Big, the fake gang leader of this criminal organization who apparently called all the shots. Mr. Big supposedly was known for being able to make your criminal problems disappear, but only if he liked you and wanted you to become an official member of their organization. So if he liked you, number one, and if he wanted you to become part of this criminal organization, then he would help you. Keep that in mind. The main things they made sure to tell Dene about Mr. Big, however, was that you had to be honest with him. Up until that point, Dene had repeated the same story over and over again. He'd been repeating it for decades to the undercover officers whenever they asked him about Wendy. But they hoped that when he faced Mr. Big, he would tell them the truth that he was really responsible for what happened to Wendy. They didn't want to just prove that Dene had been responsible for what happened to Wendy, but they also wanted to find the truth. If he was irresponsible, I really think he was caught between a rock and a hard place, and the police had put him there. He was completely desperate, at the mercy of this fake criminal organization, and he knew the story that he had been giving them up until this point wasn't getting him anywhere. It definitely wasn't getting him out of trouble or out of being a prime suspect. So on September 27, 2008, Rob Barrett sat in a hotel room, monitoring a video feed from a nearby room where Dene was meeting with who he believed was Mr. Big. Early into the conversation, something different happened. Mr. Big told Dene that he would have to come clean about his past and about his wife's disappearance, and if he had known anything about it or had been involved in any way, because that was the only way he was going to help him and possibly want him to be a part of this gang. Right now, this is when Dene, after 11 years of repeating almost the exact same story, switched things up completely. Why? Well, there could be two reasons. One, he so badly wanted to be part of this family, the family of this gang. But it is a family, and he didn't have one right now, so that could be one reason. Maybe he thought by looking more like a heartless criminal, this would build rapport. Or was it that he was about to drop a bombshell, the real truth? Dene told Mr. Big that he had never told anyone what he was about to tell him, that he was responsible for Wendy's disappearance, but not only that, her death. He told him that he hadn't been proud of what he did, but he was the one that did it. He said that everything had gone so perfectly, just as he planned. He had a rifle and he fired one shot toward the back of her head, and then he began to further elaborate on what he did. He told Mr. Big that when they went to leave that morning, Wendy stopped to feed the ducks, and that's when her back was toward him. He took out his .22 caliber, aimed, and fired. It appeared to all these undercover officers that 11 years' worth of secrets were beginning to spill right out of Dene's mouth. As he continued to talk to Mr. Big, he told him that there hadn't been a lot of blood, and that after this, she fell to the ground, and he quickly wrapped her body in a black tarp. But wouldn't there be a lot of, I don't know, you tell me, because I'm working on another case where I'm looking at crime scene evidence, and a head wound can definitely produce a lot of blood. But let's move on. He said he noticed that Wendy was still moving. That's when he took a tire iron and said he finished her off. He continued telling Mr. Big that he put Wendy in her van. He made a left turn onto Highway 16 and drove to an abandoned loggers road about an hour and a half away, and that's where he put her body into a swamp. Well, you know the cops want more, so they needed to see exactly where all of this took place in order to believe this story. Really, these were police officers wanting more information to lock him up. The next day, Dene took two of the undercover officers, whom he believed again were his crime buddies, to the alleged crime scene, the supposed crime scene where he dumped Wendy's body. Then they proceeded to tell him that they needed to make sure that there was no evidence left behind that police would discover at the swamp. So Dene pointed to this tarp that was sticking out from the swamp, obviously saying that that was part of the crime scene. The very next day, the undercover officers went back to the swamp to pick up this piece of tarp. They sent it to an analyst. What do you think? Could he have made all this up? The part about the tooth and how we explained everything away, saying that, oh, she was inside the tarp, but then, after searching, detectives found nothing there. Granted, this area was full of wildlife, bears and wolves, so they're carnivores. You can do the math. It had also been 11 years, and that's what I meant by doing the math. That's a long time. I tend to think skeptically. I think if this is a first-time killer, is he that good at committing a crime that he can hide a body that well without anyone seeing him? Nobody would look. Wouldn't that be a typical place for someone to hide someone or something, in the brush? Wouldn't detectives have canvassed all of these areas? I don't know. It was an hour and a half away, but I feel like they would know Highway 16 and they had been searching up and down it. He said that after this, he then drove back to Prince George, getting rid of the gun and Wendy's ID along the way. And that's when he left the white Plymouth Voyager in the grocery store parking lot. He claimed that he had just wandered around for a bit before he called Anna and told her that Wendy had never come to get him. He explained that he intentionally chose to bring Anna back with him around town that night, to the coffee shop and to Tim Hortons, so that she would be the one to discover the van. Even if Danae was what he thought was 100% sure that this was the right location, I can't even remember something I did yesterday, let alone something that happened 11 years ago in all of that brush. Then I thought about the fact that he would have to have the tarp ready, like she's bending down with the ducks. A couple of days after the Mr. Big operation, Anna received a phone call from the police asking that she come downtown. They sat her down and informed her that they had arrested her father. Anna broke down when she heard the news. She felt like she had always known in her heart that this was what happened. When Gabriel was brought in, though, and he was told the same news, he reacted much differently than his sister. He didn't just believe that his father could have done this to his mother, and he was a little confused about the whole sting operation and how all that went down. It was, again, just skeptical. That's how he felt, and it made him confront his father. He demanded to know what happened. Danae looked at him and told him he did not do it, and Gabriel believed him. Then Gabriel told police that he was home and he never heard any gunshot that day, especially where his dad claimed that it happened. There was no way that he wouldn't have heard something. Gabriel wasn't the only person that had been skeptical. When Gabriel contacted Wendy's family that lived in the United States and told them, they didn't believe it for a minute, especially Wendy's sister, Karen. She said that her family had always seen Danae as someone who would have died to protect his family, and they could never imagine him doing anything to hurt any one of them. Danae's sister was also skeptical and believed that her brother was innocent. There was no physical evidence even around the area, and they had searched the outside of their home. They had done all the preliminary searches in that area. No body, no DNA, no physical evidence that any foul play had been involved. Even though they had searched the area that Danae had brought them to, the analyst came back with inconclusive evidence of the tarp, yet they still arrested him. Danae even told his sister he made up the story about what he did to Wendy because he just wanted the investigation into him to stop. If he didn't come up with something to tell Mr. Big, then they weren't going to be able to help him. He also told her that he lied during the undercover operation. He told these officers at one point that he killed a man with rat poison, even though it turned out this man died of natural causes. Gabriel and Danae's sister believed that Danae felt like he belonged somewhere for the very first time in a long time, and that he would have said anything, so that he wouldn't lose that. When asked what the reason was that he would kill Wendy, when he made this confession to Mr. Big, it made everyone confused. He said that on the day he killed her, he knew that her alter ego Shauna was about to do something sexually inappropriate to Anna, and that he couldn't let that happen. So he wanted to get rid of Shauna, and in order to get rid of Shauna, he had to get rid of his wife, Wendy. Although Dennis's supporters often use the Mr. Big sting to discredit the arrest, saying that of course, he just told Mr. Big what he thought he wanted to hear. Danae actually confessed a second time, this time knowing that he was speaking to an actual officer. After Danae was arrested, his rights were read, then he was shown a video of him confessing undercover to Mr. Big. He did initially deny what he said that day. He said, "No, I didn't do it, I didn't kill her," and he denied it for almost an hour. Then police decided that they needed to show him a video that they'd recorded of Gabriel, where Gabriel had told them that he just wanted his father to tell the truth. I don't know about you, but some of these police tactics really bother me. You are pulling at this man's heartstrings. I don't know what happened. I don't know if he's guilty or not. But nonetheless, it's just interesting that they're allowed to use all these tactics. And I understand why they do it, because a lot of times it works. We catch the right person. He sat there for a few minutes after watching that video of his son, and that's when he started to repeat the same confession that he had given to Mr. Big. He told the officer, "Listen, she didn't suffer," and he told the officer that he had cried when he did it. But he did confirm everything that he said to Mr. Big in that hotel room. He said, "It's all true." In December of 2010, the trial began for the murder of Wendy Rite. Anna had been the only member of the family that wasn't standing by her father. He pled not guilty and recanted both of his confessions. Danae's defense attorney's main argument had been that there was no physical evidence and that Danae had lied about all of the things he said to Mr. Big and the undercover detectives. So, why should his confession be taken as the truth? Gabriel had been only one of 2 witnesses that took the stand for the defense. After a 4-week trial, the jury only took 2 hours to find Danae Rite guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 15 years to life. As Anna left the courtroom after her father's sentencing, her father turned to her and said, "Keep looking for your mother." She was offended by the statement. She just wanted him to admit everything. She felt it was very selfish for him to say that to her, especially after all the time that she had put into looking for her mother, from age 17 to 27, practically her entire life. Gabriel, on the other hand, is now a father himself to his own little girl, and he's allowed her to meet his father. But as of the Dateline interviews with the family, he had yet to let his sister Anna meet his daughter. Gabriel still believes that Wendy could be out there somewhere. As much as Anna is happy to finally have justice, she really does hope that she can have a relationship with her brother again. Even Wendy's family stood by Danae. They said that he was always there to protect her, and that in the United States, this outcome was not likely to ever happen. There was not enough evidence to prove he did anything except lie to the police because of their deceptive sting operation and his desperation to belong to something. He had nothing to lose. His children had totally different perspectives about their father, and this was apparent in their victim impact statements. Gabriel, who was 29 at the time, pleaded for leniency. However, Anna, through tears, said this: "He deserves to spend the rest of his life in a self-made hell." She went on to say he was self-centered and a lowlife who was full of deceit and clearly committed the act beyond a reasonable doubt. She said, "I cannot understand why murder was chosen over divorce." Anna said she lost everything: the ability for her mom to see her graduate from high school, to be at her wedding, or give her motherly advice throughout the rest of her life, and I can understand that. She told the court that she went from an idealistic free spirit who loved life with great passion and optimism to an emotionally crippled human being who has trust issues, health issues, and fear, and rightfully so. Even if her father was not responsible, it wouldn't change that. But she still referred to him as a two-faced liar, bringing up the fact that he had that secret gambling life with his scumbag buddies that he loved so much, that he stole money from his own family, from Anna, from her mother, from Gabriel. He took that money on the pretext of buying his wife an anniversary gift, only to spend it on gambling. He was just like his father. He stole money from his family, the way his own father did from his. It was just history repeating itself. She went on to explain that she still stuck up for him after he was caught selling hard drugs, and now she doesn't know how she could have been so blind. She said he's where he belongs, even if he didn't murder her mother. That's how much it seems like she hates her father. I honestly kept wondering if there was something more to what happened to her, something more to her childhood, why she harbored what seems like so much hatred toward him. Both children have changed their last names, probably to avoid the stigma that their father's last name brings. Gabriel was conflicted on what he believed. He doesn't want to lose his father because he already lost his mother, and until they find a body or can confirm that his father did this, he's not pushing him out of his life. Gabriel said, "He has been a great father to me before and after my mom disappeared, and this convinced him that he would not be a risk for reoffending." He went on to say that he had no idea his father recanted the allegation about being worried that Wendy's alter ego was hurting Anna. Once he was under oath, he said, "No, I just said that. That's not true." Gabriel didn't know that, and that made him believe even more that his father didn't do this. There was just an update about this case in September 2021. This is when Danae was denied day parole under Canadian law. It's a form of release where you can participate in public activities during the day, and then you have to return every night to either a prison or a halfway house. His behavior in prison was satisfactory, and he had been accepted into a halfway house in Lower Mainland before he got denied day parole. So that would have been great for him, but the court panel remained concerned. They said that after the murder, he was convicted and sentenced on that trafficking-related charge. and this indicated to them that his involvement in criminal activity was likely greater than what his record showed, and that he was entrenched in this criminal attitude. That's why he wanted to be part of the gang with Mr. Big. The panel said, "Your file states that you have little insider understanding into your actions. Further reports indicate you are very comfortable playing the victim role and blaming everyone but yourself. You have accepted little responsibility for your offending behavior by way of victim empathy." The panel went on to say that he had not participated in any programs or other interventions to challenge his problematic thinking patterns and behaviors that contributed to his offenses, specifically his drug-related offenses. Overall, the board remains highly concerned that he would be a violent offender with risk factors because he was unwilling or unable to challenge his persistent cognitive distortions related to his role in the crimes he committed and continued to point blame at others. Terry was busy and he kept putting it off while Mary's credit was dropping. Eric then took it upon himself to fraudulently obtain the loan using Terry's identity. Terry was going to do it anyway. He just figured, "I'm going to get the ball rolling faster." But the jury was supposed to believe that despite this breach of trust, Terry supposedly agreed to yet another loan, which Eric had also obtained fraudulently when Terry once again procrastinated. And this was secured the day of the murders. And that's not suspicious? It was argued that anyone that's rational could find Eric's testimony was completely self-serving, and it was also inconsistent to what his sisters and what Eric himself said that his dad would flip out if he found out. We're coming to the end of this video, and this was really important for me to look at, so I want to share it with you. I want to be able to break this down and think like a juror for the jury to have found Eric not guilty. This is what they would have had to believe. Are you ready? That the GPS unit in the defendant's car deactivated itself, or some unknown person deactivated fortuitously on the evening of the murders. That an unknown person made peaceable entry into the S's home and bludgeoned Kate and Jimmy. That an unknown person made peaceable entry into the Hansons' home while Eric slept and shot Mary and Terry in the master bedroom. B. Turned on all the lights in the house, including in Eric's bedroom. C. Retrieved plastic tarps from the garage and wrapped Mary and Terry's body in them. D. Moved the Hansons' vehicles and transported the bodies to the Sal's residence. E. Cleaned the Hansons' home, including Eric's bedroom. F. Moved furniture, switched mattresses, and made the beds. And G. Drilled holes in the parents' headboard and wall and then filled them. Or that an unknown person re-entered the Hansons' home on September 29th after Eric left, and A. Burned items in the fireplace. B. Burned scented candles to disguise the odors of gunpowder, blood, and cleaning agents. That an unknown person put bloody gloves containing Mary and Terry's DNA into a plastic bag from the Hansons' kitchen and then placed that bag in Eric's car. That someone besides Eric was a common link between the Hansons and the S's household. And 7. That an unknown person staged the Sal's residence to make it appear that the murders had all occurred there in order to deflect any suspicion from Eric. What do you think? If you were on the jury, what would you be thinking? This case is so complicated and complex to me, and very interesting, because it was still a fact that there were no shoe prints, fingerprints, hair, saliva, blood, or even trace evidence like a fiber from anything of Eric's at the Sal's crime scene. In closing arguments, the defense argued Eric could not have killed 4 people and cleared the homes of evidence by himself or in time to leave the next morning. I'm still stuck on the car situation. Did he walk back to his parents' house after leaving Terry's car there to throw off the search? Because I'm thinking the 3 cars were parked outside of the Hansons' residence. The one neighbor saw all 3 cars. Why would they be pulled out of the garage and put on the street? Maybe it was because, I love thinking these through, maybe it was because initially Mary's SUV was parked beside the motorcycle in the garage, and then Terry and Eric were parked outside, blocking the garage door from Mary's SUV being able to come out. Therefore, Eric takes both the cars, parks those on the streets, maybe pulls out the SUV and turns it around and faces it into the garage with the back facing a better position for him to get the bodies into the vehicle. Then he drives the SUV from the Hanson to the Sal residence. I don't know how he unloaded everything there, but it is a 3-car garage now that I'm thinking of it. 'cause there's a two-car garage, and they said there was a Lexus and a Mercedes. So I don't know about that third garage area, if he was able to use remember the missing garage door opener? If he was able to use that and then pull into that garage. I didn't think of that. But let's just say he didn't, and he was just outside. They say that the reason that Terry's body was between the Mercedes and the Lexus, which kind of means he didn't go through the other side. So let's just grasp that was because he couldn't carry him any further, like he was tired by this point. So he pulls the SUV backwards up to the garage door, opens the garage door with the garage door opener, and pulls his parents out of the vehicle into the house with no one seeing him. After he does that, he gets back in his mom's SUV, he leaves the scene, pulls his mom's car back into the Hansens' garage where it was before, and then drives Terry's and Paula's. I don't know why, 'cause that would be obvious, like why didn't you just leave it at home? Doesn't make any sense to me if you wanted to throw them off. I don't know. But he drove the Impala back to the S's, and then he would have to have walked back. How long would that have taken him? 'Cause I love doing the math, not good at math, but I like doing the math. Okay, I just paused and I looked it up. It would take him 1 hour and 30 minutes to walk from the S's residence back to the Hansens'. So if you include all of the driving time from before, and I'm just gonna say it's 40, because when I did the math it said 12 minutes. So if you're taking all of this into account, that's like 2 hours of just travel time, 2 hours, and we don't know when his parents fell asleep. Oh, I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just kind of perplexed on how he was able to pull it off. This was his first time killing people. This was his first crime scene. Maybe some people are just way better at that than others. That's creepy, but that's 2 hours of just getting from place to place. Not to mention, like I said, we don't know when his parents fell asleep. He saw his dad at 11:30. Did they fall asleep at midnight? Did they fall asleep at 1:30? When did they fall asleep? By 2 o'clock all the lights were on in the house. Let's not forget. So, I would assume it had to have happened before 2, and since he mentioned the time 1:30, that always means to me that there's some kind of significance to that. So I'm going to assume it happened at 1:30, and that's why all the lights were on by 2, when the neighbor took out her dog. So it's 2 o'clock.